Alright, here we go. What is going on, everybody? Oh my god. I need a haircut. Jesus fucking Christ. Time is here. It's 1 PM here in sunny Perth. Middle of the fucking summer. It's a temperature outside. Take one of my phones to. I'll use this phone so I can share it on my screen because that phone's got a picture of my partner on it. And yes, I am the guy with two phones. It's like 26 degrees. Can you guys see that? 26 degrees here today in Perth, Celsius. Getting my new case for this one in the mail soon. 1% chance of precipitation. Sometime in the evening. I don't really understand what those probabilities mean. Say hello in the chat. I'm just gonna keep eating because it's lunchtime now. I've got nachos. What do you guys eat for lunch? Post in the chat what do you guys ate for lunch. There is a time delay because of YouTube. All right. Do the do. G'day Keith, g'day Dunskies. You had pasta for lunch, it's good. What exactly do we have planned for today? We are going to go through really old, by old I mean like 2 or 3 years old, stuffed cabbage, yeah. Strategy videos. Macca's is always a decent choice. I hear JG is working there now. The guy like went all in and he leveraged like his entire life roll on Ether, and he had his liquidation at like 3k, and like he hit 3k for like an hour or two, and then bounced back up immediately. So it sucks to be him. It's alright. The guy essentially like stole like the guy essentially like stole $5 grand from people. So I don't really feel that sorry for him. All right, so we've got a few videos here. Now we're just gonna go through. I've also been sent one privately, which I have downloaded. And if you would like to submit some, I put them in order of oldest to newest. And some of these really new ones are from like Goosecore and stuff. So like, I'm just gonna give my commentary on what I think. It's not really gonna be, I don't think I'm gonna find too many mistakes in terms of like these top guys. They were thinking, if anything, it's gonna be like slightly stylistic. But some of these old ones are gonna be good. Let's turn this background elevator music off and get started, shall we? Oh, it looks so really. Oh my god. Hang on, I need to like change my face. I'll put my face over here or something. So then we can see the title of these videos. They're gonna be amazing. I don't put myself exactly in the corner. All right. Let's get on it. Should I put these like sped up? Oh my god, that's loud. Jesus fucking Christ. Why would you start a video like that? I mean, this is from 2016, so December 2017. 2016, is that 5 years old now? Late, blah blah blah, blah 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 blah. All right.
In Laguna Beach. This hand comes from my reader Steven. He's playing a 2-5 game at Borgata. Interesting spot here coming up for the hand of the day. And so it gets folded around to the cutoff. Cutoff makes it 20. Good pro. And Steven's in the big blind with 7-5 of diamonds. Considers 3-betting, but he writes to me and says,
so should
look,
I,
every time the cutoff opens, he opened big. He's a good player. He probably has a hand he could defend a 3-bet with. And I don't want to get involved out of position when I could just call and see the flop. I like that logic. Calling's fine here. 7-5 of diamonds, a good hand to play.
All right, so we're in the big blind. No big blind's deep. We place a 4 big blind open from the cutoff. We've got 7-5 of diamonds. I mean, I would have to know what the rake is. But knowing like live rake, this is just horrendous to call. Yeah, you don't have to call too many suited connectors and suited gappers, especially against like earlier position opens. And sort of like evidence for that here is like, this is in my sims. This is the big blind versus the button 4 big blind open. And 7-5 suited is already indifferent. I mean, I get this video is 5 years old, but I think even 5 years ago we knew that 7-5 suited was a shit hand. It's not worth 4 big blinds most of the time. So fold pre, everyone in the chat, just fold pre. Everyone in the chat, fold pre. If we see a spot where we think just fold pre, just type in fold pre, right? Fold pre.
We call, go heads up to the flop. Flop comes 8-6-4. We flop.
Oh my god, we flop the nuts. Surprising how often that happens in these hand reviews.
Flop a joint, flop the absolute nuts. Well done. Sexy spot to be in. We check, which I think is totally fine. We should be checking here pretty much all the time. And the button now bets.
I mean, I don't know about that statement. A lot of the time, like, you're checking because you think that the guy is going to bet into you, and like, if you think that's going to happen, then yeah, checking everything is probably not a bad idea because you effectively get the last in position, and then their bet kind of just doesn't mean too much besides like trying to like push value in from their range. People would check back some shit, so I can't remember what the
30 into a pot of 42. So Steven's logic, which I agree with, was like a lot of the times he noticed a pattern in the cutoff's play. Excuse me, I said the button before. He noticed a pattern in his opponent's play, and he noticed that this pattern was that a lot of times this guy missed the flop, he checked back. So when he had ace king and he missed, he would just check back and play for showdown. So why that's so important, and why it's so important to pay attention to hands when you're not in them, and why it's so important to have this information is because you can use that.
Okay, so you see how like you get this extra piece of information now, and like that changes what we should have done on the previous action. Okay, this is a 5-year-old video, so like I'm going to assume that people have gotten better in 5 years. may or may not be the case. Yeah, Keith. I mean, I certainly agree. And especially with this extra information, the guy who's in the cutoff will just like check back when they miss. Or like check back like middling hands. Unless they like connect with the board. Like you should just donk to stop them from doing that. Or you can just donk and stop them from doing that. Whether or not you need to do that with the nuts is another question, just because the nuts it works so well as like a check raise or check call flop, check raise turn. Or like depending on the run out, whatever. You're deep enough that you probably want to be check raising a board like this with the nuts all the time against most bets. This particular bet is what, like 30 into 42, so it's pretty big, and especially like considering what happened pre-flop, you would expect sort of like imposition to sort of want to size down now. And thinking about sort of like how the pre-flop ranges interact with his board, the big one's going to have a lot of, especially if they call like all the suited connectors, and like if they're calling all the suited gappers, then they've got the straight here, and they've got a lot of two pairs. If they're not calling those suited gappers, which I don't think at equilibrium you should, then it's just a bunch of one pairs and sets. A lot of the other pairs of this board, like jacks plus, tens plus, should have 3-bet pre-flop. On the other hand, there's a lot of Broadway stuff that's missed. But when like you're facing a bet this big, depending on like how polar the range is, you can probably just raise a lot. So the first question was like whether or not you should have bet the flop, and whether or not this checking back, this check raise is a good idea.
Say, well, wait a minute. If some of the time he checks back the flop, when he bets, what does that mean? It means he probably connected with it in some way, because he showed the tendency to give up or check back or not bet 100% of the flop. So that means when he's not betting flops 100% of the time, being the pre-flop raiser, means that when he does bet, it gives you more information about the types of hands he's likely to have. In this case, I think it makes his hand likely to be stronger, because this flop could have connected with the big blind. And if he's going to check back like hands with showdown value, like ace high or maybe bottom pair or whatever, when he bets on a flop like this, it means he must have connected, and he probably has some decent equity, right? Even if he has.
All right, so it took us 45 seconds of monologuing to determine that if he's betting, he's got a stronger hand than if he's checking. Or do I not electorally?
As a draw, he probably has something that connected with this board. So Steven uses that logic to his advantage. Well done, Steven. And decides to raise. He makes it 85 here. Now,
this is going to be a long video. I mean, this is first out of 9, I think 10 that we're going to be looking at these. So
I love Steven's logic.
I'm just going to like eat. All right, I suggest you guys do as well, because this is going to take a little while to digest the food in front of us and this nonsense from ages ago.
But what I would advise, maybe like a piece of like subtle bet sizing strategy that you can use.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes that like a lot of low stakes players make is that they don't want to go all in, or like they don't plan to go all in somewhere in the hand. Like you flop the nuts, figure out a way to go all in. It's not a good way of doing it, but raising to 85. I mean, 85 is not too bad because you've got a lot of other shit left, but like sometimes a turn gets really shit and you just want to jam, so I mean, this particular hand is so strong that especially, I mean, I would have preferred it with the backdoor flush draws. If you want to go this small, if you don't have the backdoor flush draws, then maybe you would want to go big, or like if you got the club version. Anyway,
here is, given that you know all this stuff that we discussed, your opponent doesn't bet the flop all the time. When he does, he probably has it. He probably connected with this board, and he's probably has a hand that could withstand a check raise. Why not raise a little bit bigger? I mean, you make it 85, he's calling 55 into a pot of like 150 or something. He's getting such a good price, he's going to call with anything. I would, and while you want him to call, in the long run, there's times where you're going to want him to fold because you could be bluffing here. You're going to want to raise bigger when you're raising here, right? So I would raise like 125 and really put the pressure on now and make a stand on the flop and have him be in a tough spot where he knows that if he calls this bet on the flop, you know, it's setting it up for a big bet on the turn and an all-in jam on the river, applying a max pressure on the flop. So it really makes that flop play so much stronger when the raise size is bigger, because that compounds throughout the hand, and now that flop raise is really damn threatening, because he knows, shoot, if I continue here with an overpair, I'm at risk for my whole stack. And even if that's a subconscious message you're sending, I think you got to put that
subconscious message. I like how it talks about subconscious messages, and like his thing is called conscious poker or some shit. That's just good.
That aggression in like level 5 or gear 5, whatever, however you want to think about it, and really go for the max here. So I like your logic. I like your thoughts.
All right, man. You can you make a big check raise and send subconscious vibes to your opponent.
That's one strategy I would use, just to like tweak it a little bit and get that extra EV out of that raise. Anyway, he calls, which we expect, and we go heads up to the turn.
Why is there like always? Why is there like an ad for himself in the middle of the video? Just when the third card comes.
The turn comes a 6, bringing a flush draw, pairing the board. Really connected card here. But at the same time, we feel like we still have the best time, right? If our opponent had a set on the flop, especially with this small of a raise size, you'd think he would 3-bet us and probably apply a little more pressure with some of the straight draws out there. So I don't think he has a set, probably not 2 pair. If he does, whatever, we're going to lose all our money anyway. So we might as well continue with the hand. Steven mixes it up a little bit, decides to check here. And I'm not really sure why. Like, I guess he's saying that, you know, he tried to be tricky, tried to mix it up. But at the same time, if your opponent had a hand that he could call a bet on the flop with, he probably has an overpair or top pair or some piece of that board, like 8-7 or something like that, maybe even a 6, maybe 6-7, 6-5. Those hands could all continue again on the turn, right? The 6 makes it less likely that you have a strong hand, Steven. Think about that. It's not a card that helped you. It's a card that hurt you, because on the flop, if you're repping 2 pair or a set, the chance that you have that now on the turn is reduced because another 6 came out, meaning there's less possibilities of sets and 2 pairs that you can have, right? There's only 1 combination of quads now, whereas before there were 3 combinations of sets, pocket 6s. So it's way less likely you have a strong hand now on the turn. So it makes it more likely you're bluffing when you bet. I would go ahead and bet here, and I would try and, you know, scale this pot and get my stack.
Okay, what? Okay, so logic. The logic here is the 6 comes, so you're less likely to have it. So you're more likely to be bluffing when you bet. So when you have the nuts, or when you have a strong hand, you should bet. That totally just like disregards the other line you could take, which is like check raising the turn. Because that same logic where like the 6 comes and it's less likely that you have it, you're more likely to be bluffing. Like, think about what happens when you check. When you check, your opponent's going to be thinking, okay, well, they have a missed bluff, that maybe they've got draw equity against you, against those other pairs, blah, blah, blah. Aren't they just more likely to bet into you? And so, like, when you've got a strong hand, if you check and your opponent's likely to bet into you, because they think that you've got a bluff, or a missed bluff that's now checking. When you've got a strong hand, you should check, take that free bet from your opponent, and then just raise them. And that just ends up with a better outcome than just betting. So like the argument for always betting this hand, I don't think makes any sense. In general, when the boards are pretty shit for your range, like, and you're out of position, checking makes the most sense because your opponent will bet into you to deny equity from all the weak hands which you have. And like if you've got a lot of weak hands, so for example, after you check raise the flop, the 6 comes, it's totally fucking missed all those bluffs. Besides like random fucking 6-5, 7-6. And it's arguable whether those will have raised the flop in the first place. So like when you've got a turn card like this, you're out of position and you've just missed. A lot of the time you'll want to check anyway. You want to basically just check everything, or check all those bluffs that have missed, right? So if you're checking all the bluffs that have missed, and your opponent wants to bet into those bluffs to deny equity from those bluffs don't you don't want to let those bluffs see the next card, blah blah blah. putting strong hands in there, checking strong hands and going for a second check raise just makes more sense than just betting it yourself. Yeah. It's just really old logic to be thinking like I have more bluffs and so I should be getting called. Like, it doesn't make sense all the time. Anyway.
Stack in by the river. So I'd go ahead and bet, like, given the size of the pot and how much you bet on the flop, I'd bet like 120 here, 130 here on the turn. Whatever size I would bet as a bluff, I would bet with a value. It's important to be balanced. And then I'd bomb it on the river, man. I'd just jam it in on the river.
This is kind of like the issue with like the stack to pot ratio on the flop betting. Like, they opened a 4x, so like when they opened a 4x, the stack to pot ratio is going to be half of what it would be if they opened a 2x. And so when that happens and like you face this big flop bet, like you can set yourself up on the turn to just like check raise flop jam turn if your flop check raise was big enough. And like some hands would want to do that, and other hands would just want to like check raise flop bet small on the turn and then jam the river, where the stack to pot ratio is very small. And then like you just like end up betting like half pot on the turn, and then like you jam for a third of the pot on the river. Unlike in in like 3-bet pots where you have a low stack to pot ratio starting on the flop, and you just like bet close to sort of geometric. So it's getting to like geometric sizes, and like you can size up a bit on the flop in order to allow the turn of the river to be, you know, a little bit smaller and still have the potential for some hands to jam the turn. And that sort of keeps the range together. We don't really have to do that. You can split 2 different flop raise sizes if you want to. I mean, no one runs sims on 4x opens because it doesn't happen unless you're playing in a live game. So, and no one knows what they're doing in a live game.
River, that's what you should do. So anyway, you decided to check. I guess it's okay, but I just feel like most of the time, like your opponent's not gonna bet. Even if he has 2 kings, he's like, it's kind of weird spot. Maybe my.
Okay, so you see how like the fact that the opponent is not gonna bet, that's a big argument for betting yourself. That's the correct argument to make. Not the fact that you could be bluffing, or you have a lot of bluffs and you've missed. Right? The argument for betting here out of position on the turn is the fact that the opponent is going to check back a lot rather than bet into you. Okay? So what Torelli is saying about, you know, these overpairs being in a weird spot and not knowing what to do, so they'll check back. Right? You know, the whole fucking fish mindset of, I have no idea how strong my hand is, so I'm just going to like check call and hope to win. That's a good argument for betting the turn. Right, when you've got a hand that's strong and you're deciding whether to check or bet the turn, you need to decide one or the other and weigh up the 2 options. And usually if your opponent is going to be betting into you, if you check, then you should check. And if your opponent's going to check back, you should bet. Cool.
My opponent has a boat. Maybe he's bluffing. I'm just going to play pot control. I don't want to get check raised. He's just going to check behind, dude.
Maybe he's bluffing, so I'm going to play pot control.
So like all the hands that he would bet, he would call a bet with. And then you give him free cards on the hands that he would call a bet with, but he's not going to bet himself. So I don't really love the check, man. It's not often that I lay down the hammer and I'm like, this is the best play.
That's right. So he Torelli got there in the end with the correct logic for, well, the correct argument for making a bet.
But I'm pretty damn sure that on the turn, you should bet. That's my logic, man. So I would bet the turn. Anyway, you decided to check, whatever it is, what it is. River comes to 4, pairing the board twice, doesn't bring the flush draw. So we got 8, 6, 4, 6, 4, right? Still unlikely that we're beat here. I mean, it's unlikely our opponent has a 4. It's unlikely he has a 6. He probably would have bet the turn with a 6. So, I mean, the only hand that beats us now is like a 4 that he somehow had on the flop. So still really likely we have the best hand. Still likely our opponent probably has an overpair. How do we get value? Steven compensates for the lack of value he got on the turn and bets the pot, which I like. I mean, shoot, let's be honest, man. It's really less likely you have it's way less likely you have a boat or a boat at this point, because there's even less combinations of sets and 2 pairs you could have had now that the 4 came. and like you're either repping, a boat or maybe a straight or air. And given that your range is so polarized here, like why not bet big? And your opponent's probably going to call you, check the turn. I mean, he's probably not going to let go of his overpair. I would just bet big. And I like that you did that. You bet the pot, compensated for the lack of bet on the turn.
I like how 5 years ago pot size bets were considered big. That's I mean, pot size bets these days are just like so small. You just got to like 4x pot it all the time. Just your opponent checked, man. Just go all in. Like what is this? Like they check, they don't have shit, just fucking rip it. It's only like a 2x pot jam, so I don't know. It's really fun playing against well, fun is relative. Playing like live like this, whatever. They just have no idea what you're doing when you just when they check back the flop and then they just like 5x probe into them. I remember this. Maybe it's sorry for a different time. Yeah, I'll tell it anyway. I can remember one time I was playing some shitty live game. Oh yeah, I wasn't even in poker 5 years ago. Like this is 2016. This is before my time. That's what I'm saying. This is 5 years ago, so like I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt. For 5 years ago, once we get to like 2019, 2020, then like, maybe you should learn. Where was I with the story? Oh yeah, it was blind versus blind or something, and I think I flopped a nut straight with like 6-3, and like the turn brought forward to a straight, and I just like 5x pot it into the guy, and the guy like tanked for 20 minutes before calling with a 3, and then on the river my straight got counterfeit, so we're just like chopping the pot, and then it just went check check, or was it check bet call, some shit like that. But they just tank, against overbet and then call anyway. So like just because they're tanking doesn't mean they're gonna fold. Tanking usually means they're gonna call.
And your opponent hemmed and hawed.
So like here this river, just rip it, man.
And called.
You just missed out on $200. Like
with I'm assuming what was an overpair, but I still think that if you bet the turn, you could have got 2 more streets of value, gotten your whole stack in. So you bet this hand and
you could just got your whole stack in now by just jamming the river.
You won money and he called. But I think, missing value is the same thing as not making money. So I think we missed a little bit of an opportunity here.
So like, yeah, I mean, this was 5 years ago, but people, I mean, the whole geometric bet sizing's been around since like 2006, I think. Back from when Mathematics of Poker was released. So like, I mean, if Jorok's had 10 years to figure it out, maybe you should have done that by now. All right, let's call it the end of this one.
Could have got our stacks in.
Boring. Okay. Before we go to the next one, this is just going. I'm just doing this in chronological order. We're going from the 17th of December 2016, and we're jumping a whole bunch of years. So if anyone has anything in between as a last minute submission, we should look at that one first. Otherwise, we're going to look at, who's this guy? Alvin the Chipmunk. All right, let's should we dive into this or should we talk about this one more? Are we all happy with this one? I don't know if the analysis was like wrong per se. It's just like old, like the way people thought about the game 5 years ago was different to how they think about it now. The line that this guy took was horrible. First off, fucking fold pre, like, and then like realize your hand when you flop the nuts is strong enough to get all the money in on like almost any run out. Yeah. What else can I say? And you just try to get all the money out. All right, what is this one? GTO's secret weapon is simplification. I can already tell this is going to be cringe.
Play a GTO based style or
all right,
solver
so this is a good start.
A lot of people
we don't get like our ears destroyed by the start of the video.
Very often they think that means that you make a model in PO, you look at how PO plays in any given situation, and you try to imitate that situation as closely as possible. There's a couple problems with that. So first off, this is a situation where we have raised the cutoff in a 5-10 game. We raised to 3x, and then on the flop we can bet 66. On the turn we can bet 66 125, and then on the river we can bet 66% or 125%. Seems to be fairly standard and seems.
Okay, so is this a simplification? I don't see where the simplification is yet. This has got to be it, right? Surely we're going to be comparing. Surely we're going to be comparing this sim to the GTO sim where we've got, you know, more than one fucking bet and raise size on the flop, and then in position, and then out of position only has one, including on the river, where like out of position loves to use a lot of sizes, and then we get all-in threshold to be 67% of the initial effective stack. I can't remember what that means in Pio. It's been a while since I used Pio, but does that mean like if you put more than 2/3 of your stack in, you just like go all in instead of having those nodes? I mean, that doesn't seem too unreasonable, but there are some spots where, yeah, 2/3 is probably all right. Maybe if you increase this to like 75, just to be safe. Add all ins if you're less than 500. I mean, I just like all ins everywhere just because it happens sometimes. So, all right. So hopefully this is a simplification.
Strategy and bet sizing that a lot of regulars.
And so we can see with this supercomputer, like, where is the estimation for how much RAM it needs? Server basic, server basic, server basic.
Using.
Wasn't there like a Pi Server Pro or something back then? How was Pi Server Pro different from Pi Server Basic back in 2019? I'm sure the product hasn't changed too much in terms of like what they offered, right? So anyway, let's continue.
When I arrive on the flop, my opponent will check to me with 100% of his range, which seems to make a lot of sense on Queen 8-3. My opponent should not.
I mean, sure, it makes a lot of sense when you put this bet size in. Why the fuck would you bet out of position with 2/3? I don't know.
Leading into my uncapped range very often. And then here on the turn, this is how we should proceed. So, one of the first things.
Wait, hang on. What was?
Notice is that many of these hands.
What was the preflop spot again?
Fairly standard, and then on the river we can bet 66% or 125. Turn we can use the.
Hang on, I missed it.
There's a couple problems with that. A situation where we have raised the cutoff.
You've raised the cutoff.
5-10 game, we raised to 3x, and then
I'm so confused by these ranges.
We can bet 66 on the turn. We can bet 66 125. And then on the river, we can bet 66%.
All right, so this is a single raise pot between cutoff and big blind after you've opened 3x.
Many of these hands play a mixed strategy. King 10, King Jack, Jacks even, 10s even, all mixed between betting and checking. This strategy is very difficult to reproduce over the table. So one of the tests that I like to make,
ball count, scripting, preflop stuff.
Is this strategy reproducible if I have the strategy in front of me as I'm playing? I would argue that given whatever a 30-second online timer, I might not be able to faithfully.
The issue is not that you can reproduce it. The issue is like what you're looking at as a model of the game is just ends up just being completely detached from reality. The reality of the actual spot. And then like if you end up playing, you know, these sub games of the real game, you know, I'm like assuming from this flop is a sub game of your pre-flop strategy, and your pre-flop strategy is what, like, I don't know, what was it, a 5-10 game where we open 3x from the cutoff? First off, what's the rake? I would love to see what the rake is, because when you're playing like a 5-10 game, isn't the rake like through the roof? Maybe opening 3x then is not too bad, just considering how bad people play. But then if people play really bad, like maybe your pre-flop ranges are just shit for the out of position player, and like then the in position player, like I don't really understand what's going on with this big, you know, gap here. If you're saying that the suited connectors are shit, then why did you open them in the first place? That's just me rambling. But the whole idea with this, looking at the sim, like the reason why you're looking at the sim in the first place is so that you get a better idea about what's going on with the strategies between the two players. You don't really need to memorize everything. And memorizing everything, it's like trying to learn chess by memorizing all of the openings or some shit, or like memorizing all the sub games to the nth degree. Like you're never going to be able to do that. And so like this argument for like simplifying these trees or simplifying the strategies and then trying to blah 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 get EV that way is analogous to like trying to learn chess by simplifying the opening or only learning one particular opening or one like really shitty opening. I'll give an example. Does anyone know what the hippopotamus opening is in chess? Hang on. Hippopotamus opening. The hippo opening. Hippopotamus defense. This thing. How do I? No. Anyway, it's the one where like you set your pawns up kind of a bit weird, and then like the knights are in the middle and the bishops are just both fianchettoed. So, it's pretty easy to like learn that opening because you just do it, and like it's kind of like regardless of what your opponent is doing. Where do we get? But like, how is that supposed to like make you get better at the game? Like it's not. You just simplified it and you've lost EV in the process, right? Because your chances of winning with the hippopotamus is like really low. Unless your opponent just like makes a big mistake. And then you've put yourself on the back foot, and you have to play the end part of the game, the middle game, and the end game really well in order to compensate. It's the same kind of thing when you do the simplification.
After all,
This
some
type of
of these
simplification
spots require mixing to strange percentages. Am I really going to be able to bet Ace Jack of Spades 7.5% of the time? Probably not. Right? I would need some kind of external randomization that I would not be able to use, you know, in like a tournament setting, I imagine.
The alternative is to just like use your head and think, okay, well, against this opponent, he's betting X percentage of the time for X percentage size. A good thing to do, or maybe I should just do all of one thing or all of the other thing, which is what you should be doing when you're playing against weaker opponents. Is to try to guess which of the two lines is for each hand is the higher EV.
So rather than try to memorize all of these hands. There's better ways to approach the scenario. Okay, so first off, let's use one of the important features that Pio has and evaluate what our EV is in the scenario. So over the course of this video so far, I let Pio run down, and we can see that our EV of this like classic style is 39025. So we'll call this for now old and busted. Okay, let's look at some more modern alternatives that I think might be better both philosophically and in terms of execution. Okay, so rather than bet 66 here, we're going to make some slight changes. We're going to go down to 33, and rather than allowing our solver to both bet and check, we're going to force our opponent to check to us, and then we have to bet in position. We're not really losing that much accuracy in our model by forcing our opponent to check to us, because this is a board where our opponent was naturally going to be checking us to the majority of the time in the first place. Let's go ahead and build this tree, and we are going to look at this simplified strategy. So first, let's just make sure that this is what the strategy that we are looking for is. We check 100%, and then we bet 100%. So, is this strategy reproducible if you have it in front of you? Obviously, if you have this in front of you, you should be able to duplicate this. Hopefully anyone who is capable of logging onto YouTube and getting to my video is capable of just mashing the bet button here. And more importantly, is this strategy reproducible over the table? Yes. If you can recognize this situation,
yeah, I don't know. What was this turn range? I can't copy paste the two ranges here. Look, a lot of the reason. Where is my power pick lab? Here it is. A lot of the reason why like range betting is in certain spots is okay, right, or seems okay initially, it's just because like you end up having like an enormous range advantage to start with. Like is this the range? I don't know. I think there's some hands missing, isn't there? Or some of the hands are weighted differently. But like a lot of the time, like the reason why the solver says your EV is okay, or at least will initially say that, is because you end up in the spot where you're making the range bet, having just an overall equity advantage to start with. King 8. So like if you just like look at the equity of the two players, I mean, hopefully, if you're making a range bet or a small size, hopefully you've got an equity advantage, right? So what was this? Queen of Hearts, 8 of Clubs, 3 of Diamonds. Evaluate. So you've got a 52 to 47% equity advantage over your opponent. So that's the main cause of the reason why like the solver is not going to be able to punish, or for out of position, be able to punish you as much for making this range bet, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that range betting is correct. It just means that, you know, if it was the other way around, like, and you make out of position, make the range bet, right? Even if in position just calls their entire range, or whatever the range bet is, like out of position just loses money because they make a 47 to 52% bet. To start with. So like the reason why this range bet, it appears initially to not lose that much is because you have a pretty big equity advantage, range versus range advantage to start with.
You have it in front of you. Obviously, if you have this in front of you.
The other thing that this just does is it just like loses a whole bunch of EV with certain hands. Like when you're trying to grow the pot, if you have a strong hand, because you're doing this, you kind of rely on your opponent raising you. Which is where a lot of the EV with a very strong hand is going to come from. Like say you've got an 8 or a set of 8s, set of 3s, right? It's like an overpair. If you make a small bet here, a lot of your EV comes from the fact that your opponent's going to raise you at a higher frequency because you made this range bet, rather than like making a more appropriate size bet on the flop and then changing your bet size on the turn. It also means that you need to change a lot of your bet size on the turn in order to accommodate for the fact that you made a mistake on the flop.
You should be able to.
So like it's just pushing the difficult decisions from the flop to the turn.
Hopefully, anyone who is capable of locking.
So we're getting there. We just go out of our way to assume that the people that are watching this video are idiots, because you know, if you can click on my video, you're smart enough to make a 1/3 pot range bet. Like, why would you do that to the people that are watching your video? Why would you just assume that they're an idiot? I don't understand like why you disrespect your customers that way.
Then you get to play the strategy and then capture all of the EV of the simplification.
Capture all of the EV.
And then capture.
Because it requires the guy to raise 23.42% of the time. Isn't a tremendous advantage. I mean, it is when you're in position. It's actually a lot when you're in position. Yeah, having any equity advantage just gets like magnified by the stack depth and position. So like it's ends up being pretty nice.
Capture all of the EV of the simplification. What do I mean by capturing all the EV of the simplification? Is as this begins to solve down, we can already see that the EV of playing this strategy is at least as good or pretty close to old and busted.
Old and busted, new hotness.
So this is probably going to solve down to, let's say, you know, it's looking like it's going to go down to like 39.20, something like that. We can just stop it. So let's look at these two different betting schemas. You can either play that kind of random mixed strategy that I showed you initially, or you can play this. If you look at the EVs, they run extremely close together, right? So if you play
the EV of the overall range might appear to run extremely close together because the solver is going to try to compensate for your mistake. It's going to try and take advantage of the mistake. I mean, should I run my own sim just to as like a counterexample? Because hopefully he compares the EV of the individual hands, right? Like he's got to do that.
Right? The best EV that you could get against another optimal opponent, obviously, is going to be 39. However, if I range bet 1/3 in this spot, this is the maximum or the minimum EV that I'm guaranteed against another optimal opponent, right? So in some spots, you just make more money.
You're not really guaranteed anything. Okay. Let's I don't know what the preflop ranges were, so I'm just gonna like copy and paste what I've got here. What was the board? 0% chance that he check raises 23% of the time. Yeah, I agree. All right, what was this? Was this the board? Yeah. Build tree. What was the starting pot again? 65 versus 65 and 970. 65, 970. Do we want rake? What is the rake? We just do it without rake for now. Let's turn that off. Let's turn that off. Okay, so we're just gonna like do the same thing that he did to try and get an idea of what we're talking about. And I'm of the advantage of like, I have the advantage that I'm in the future and he's in the past. So take everything take all of my criticisms with that in mind, right? That the fact that I have 3 years worth of tech and blah 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 advantage over him, right? So this is critiquing old videos. So please take everything I say with the fact that these people that I'm critiquing existed in the past, and hopefully they've had that time to improve their own understanding of the game. Got me? All right. What were the bet sizes again? Like just 50 everywhere, except in position can bet 66 or some shit. What was it again? I have to go all the way back here. $125. That's 125. Okay. 66, 125. And all the raise sizes are just 50%. 66, 125. And then the flop bet was 66. Does this look correct? And then the bet size is 60, 60. Okay. Oh my god. This is an enormous sim. Look at the single raise pot sit, right? It takes a whole 2.5 gigabytes of RAM. I'm pretty sure my phone back in 2019 had more RAM than that. What do you want to do it down at 0.5? I don't know how long this is going to take, so I'm just going to run it to 2% and see if we can get an idea of what is happening. In the meantime, let's keep listening. So we have the Men in Black reference. Okay.
Multiple simplifications to
Checks
get
everything.
nearly as much EV as a more, I guess.
Yeah. Let's stop that. I'm gonna do the same thing you did, just to save RAM and make it run quicker. And if that's the case, I'll make it 1%. I'll make it 0.5%. We've got all day, right?
Strategy. So here, when we get to the turn, we'll see that
I'm gonna keep itching eating my nachos.
Kyle uses a somewhat complicated mixed strategy. There's gonna be some spots where we want to overbet, some spots where we want to use a normal bet size, and there's gonna be plenty of checks. This can also be simplified. You can't use it in 1 or 2 rules the way that you can simplify the flop, but there are probably a handful of heuristics that you can apply. I would say under 10 total, maybe under 6, that you can just instantly apply to this board and get you towards 98.5% of the EV. How do we find what those heuristics are? The first thing I'm going to do is, because I want to study just the turn, I'm going to create a subtree configuration. And what that does is it isolates all of my opponent's hands that would have continued to the turn. It isolates all my hands that would have continued to the turn, which in this case is my entire range, because I just bet range on the flop. And now it has added a 4th card to the board. So basically it is running a sim assuming that the flop is not a variable that we can adjust and that we can only...
Alright, I don't know what he's doing on the turn. Does this look similar to what he had? Check there, raising 10% of the time. Overall EV 40.50. This is close, right? And then what did he do on the turn? We changed the size and then we changed the raise frequency. Something like that. Look, I'm gonna save this so that I don't lose it. I'm gonna title it as Alvin 2019. And then we did 66 on the flop, didn't we? Alright, so let's save it as that. And what is the point that I'm trying to make? Okay, so what What does he do? So he just no locks the entire thing. Okay, so let's do that first. Let's make this 33. We build tree. And then does it just like go through and delete that tree and delete that line? Delete this. Delete. How do I do that? I have to edit tree. That's right. Import tree. Left click, delete, accept. Accept changes. Confirm. All right, now we got a range bet. So let's see what that does. You can see how high level this is by how quickly it solves. Hmm. 27. Oh my god. All right. 20. Do people do that? So like you need it to. All right, so you need to raise 27. Do people raise 27%? All right, where is our EV here? 40.21. What was the EV in the previous one? Hang on, I need to open this up. Let's save this as 33 flop. Range bet. All right. 40.21. We're getting there. We're getting there. Where's the old one? This one. This one. Raising 9% of the time. 40.50. So, I mean, you've already lost 30 cents by doing this, assuming that your opponent raises everything. And then that's not very pretty. Let's just do it this way. We can just like compare the EVs, the individual hands. Okay. Starting from the top, maybe. So the EVs are the individual hands. Sort of where GTO you made the big bet size and small bet size. The fact that even compare the two bet sizes at the start is a bit worrying for me. All right, so these nut hands are going to have a high EV because you get check raised a lot. So we know that. And then when we get a bit lower, like kings and stuff. Where's kings? 140. So you get check raised a lot. That's really good. Then down at the bottom, for hands where like you don't really want to get check raised, you go from 15 down to 10. Okay. So you just lose half a big blind by making the bet, rather than having sort of like a mixed strategy where you could potentially be checking back. So these strong hands, they gain EV because your opponent has check raised you more. Went from a 10% check raise to a 27% check raise. And these weak hands have lost EV because your opponent check raises you more. Went from 10% to 27%. And then overall, you lose 30 cents worth of EV, right? So the individual hands The individual hands struggle, especially the weaker ones, because of the high check raise frequency. All right. Does anybody have any questions about this point where like it's not just you're comparing the overall EVs, you're comparing the hand versus hand EV between the two sims? This one looks easier, but a lot of the hands will just lose EV and require your opponent to check raise at a very high frequency. Okay, and if they don't check raise that frequency, then you know the hands are going to have different EVs from each other. Okay, let's run a third sim where the two sizes are both in there. Because if you're going to compare sizes like this, you might as well run a sim where you have two bet sizes on the flop. Does this make sense? Is everyone who is watching this following along?
Okay. These variables from the turn and beyond.
So going back to the turn.
Here, I'm not going to force my opponent to check, even though my opponent will be checking the majority of boards.
The turn.
So let's say we wanted to see what the EV of our version of this strategy is. So let's say we never overbet. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the node lock. We're going to say we never overbet here. Okay, so we're going to apply that. And then let's say that rather than betting whatever this optimal range is, we bet aces, kings, queens, ace, king, queens.
Double does. We don't have to add flop checks back because they're going to check everything anyway.
Eights,
double this turn.
Twos, 8, 3, and this. So this is like only value hands. And let's just throw in jack 10 and 9, 10. So 6. So we lost a substantial amount of EV by playing our extremely.
So you lost a substantial amount of EV by playing like shit.
Okay. Range as opposed to optimal. Again, versus.
All right.
So if you go into here, you can then say, okay, I want to add in some overbets. Let's add in, let's make this and see that our EV. All
right. So you miss out on the overbets and then you lose a bunch of EV.
Oh.
Don't you think that maybe the EV will stack between the two, both the flop and the turn? Like you putting too little money in on the flop with strong hands, and then putting too little money in on the turn with strong hands means that you just don't put enough money in with strong hands in general and you just lose EV that way. Is this done? This is the one, right? So we'll save this as 33p, 66p, and we have a flop. Okay, so our EV went up even more by adding more bet sizes in, which is exactly what you expect. When you add more sizes in, you end up winning more. The third pot size is being used half the time, and they raise 17.6%, which maybe is closer to what you'd think, and then the EV of queens and stuff is a bit lower. But now let's do some proper node locking, and we just lock this raise, and we lock we lock this raise, so lock the responses to these two, and then we lock hero to just bet everything, for the 1/3 pot. So you understand what I did? So I took the GTO sim, or the sim that's closer to GTO, which had a 40.56 EV, and now I did this range bet, and we're locking the opponent's raise and call strategy against this particular bet. Now we run it, and then we'll see how much EV it's got. Or at least we'll see how much EV it's got with some of the good hands, or some of the hands compared to this original sim. I don't know what happened to... There we go. What happened to that view there?
What do I think is a near optimal range here for an attack or a deviate? Response is going
So
to be
something
bluff way less.
turn.
So very often you can just node lock your opponent, you can find out what the optimal response is, and then you can try to test yourself and see if you can get close to that optimal response. And the more you test yourself, the more accurately you can get towards the GTO approximation against your opponent, the more you'll be able to do that over the table. So
And then just, you know, running these sims over and over again is somehow easier than just learning the GTO from the start. I don't know. This one done? Alright, we're done. So EV of the range bet was lower by about 10 cents. Okay, despite the fact that they're not raising everything. So we'll save this as range bet again. Open this old one up. All right, so we went from if our opponent plays a little bit closer to how they actually play, right? So instead of like knowing your range bet and you raise 27%, you know, just raising close to an appropriate amount against this. And have a look at the EV of the individual hands again. Okay, EV of the individual hands compared to the two. So this is the one where you're hoping that your opponent makes the mistake of knowing that you're range betting and then raising 27% of the time. Big EV difference between the two hands. This is the original one where you just split between 2/3 and check, which ends up being worse by a significant margin than and like it's totally different between like splitting between 2/3, 1/3 and check. Right, see how like the more sizes you put in, the closer you're going to get, the more EV you're going to squeeze out of it. So range betting with two sizes. No, this one is range bet, but it's locked so that we're using the response from this sim, which used the two sizes. So that you can make an accurate comparison between what the EV of the actual hands are. Okay. So the EV of the hands went up a little bit for the stronger hands because, you know, taking a line where you think your opponent's going to have trash. And then the EV of range betting with a weak hand goes down. Right. So overall, these range bets for a small size, if your opponent plays back at you, assuming that you're range betting for a small size, right? If they assume, okay, so like, think this way, if they make the assumption that you're range betting for a small size, right, you'll lose 30 cents, 35 cents. If they don't assume that, you just lose 10 cents. Okay. and that's overall. The individual hands will lose even more or gain even more. So what you're really doing when you're playing like these really weird strats where you just like simplify everything by range betting is just transferring the EV from one to the other, one hand to the other, because you're assuming that your opponent's going to play back at you appropriately, which is in general against human players a false assumption to make. It's not correct to assume that your opponents are actually going to be playing back at you appropriately or knowing what you're doing. And in the solver, that's not correct either. So you just like, it ends up being garbage in, garbage out. All of these simplifications. All right, is that enough for this video? Do you want to go to the next one? I need some more nachos in the meantime. You guys can decide. Or if you guys have any questions about what I'm trying to demonstrate. Next video. All right. All right, this one. Fortunately, we're picking on Alvin again. It's titled "How to C-Bet Out of Position Pi Solver Tutorial." Yeah, I mean, you think about that, Dunsies, but like,
Everyone, this is Alvin from
I was
Alvin
submitted
Teaches
two of
Poker,
these.
and today, which basically means when I'm in position, I prefer to bet my entire range 100% of the time as often as humanly possible for the sake of simplicity, as long as my EV guaranteed by betting a third is going to be very, very close to the EV that GTO will guarantee with a much more complicated mixed strategy.
Okay, so we just happened to like click at the part of the video where he said the most ridiculous bit. Jesus fucking Christ, Alvin, you're not making it difficult for me, are you? Okay. So what are the ranges? Is this cutoff versus?
You guys all know by now, I'm a big
fan of
range.
big fan of
The board comes king
shit.
8-4.
All right, so we've got here's to be cutoff open to 2.5 and the button flats from some pre-flop sim maybe. Let's just use the Zenith ranges because you know they're better. Do I want to use a 2.5? 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. Okay. I mean, cutoff doesn't even open 2.5 that often. Copy this. 2.5. That's what the range actually looks like. Hang on, I don't need this. Let's put this in the cutoff. Cutoff opens 2.5. And button flat. All right, evaluate all. So, in general, if you're out of position, cutoff versus button, where you open 2.5 and you get called, got a range disadvantage. Okay. So, your range disadvantage by 2.5%. This is correct ranges. This is the button flat. This is the cutoff open. Don't know where King 5 went, but you know it doesn't open that often. And then you have the statement.
hopefully merging our ranges into a singular action as often as strategically viable, which basically means when I'm in position, I prefer to bet my entire range 100% of the time as often as humanly possible for the sake of simplicity, as long as my EV guaranteed by betting a third is going to be very, very close to the EV that GTO will guarantee with a much more complicated mixed strategy. So here I've set up.
Okay, so I think he just said something about what we just in the video that we just covered, and now we're out of position. So maybe he's going to explain what his out of position strategy is. So we already talked about the in position strategy where like it kind of just didn't work because you end up having to assume in order to like capture most of your EV back, you have to assume that your opponents are raising you a lot or not raising you a lot really. And even then you lost 30 cents. And 30 cents out of a $60 pot might not seem a lot. But it is in the grand scheme of things. 30 cents is 0.3 big blinds for that 5-10 game. So 0.3 big blinds is 30 big blinds per 100 hands. So going out of your own way to make a 30 big blind per 100 hand mistake sounds like a losing strategy. And I'm really trying to think now of like the counter arguments to it. And I really can't come up with anything. So if yeah, C betting 100% out of position is just going to get you shredded if you do this. When you've got an equity disadvantage. So you've got an equity disadvantage. So just on average, if you just did it on every board, you would, even if your opponent called 100% of their range, you would lose 2.5% of your bet. So doing it out of position with a range disadvantage doesn't make any sense. In position with a range advantage can work. Right? But you end up, shortchanging yourself by, between like 10 and 30 big blinds per 100 hands. Just doing this, losing 2.5% of the pot plus your bet. So losing 2.5% of your bet every single time that you just like range bet is pretty bad. So yeah, kiddies, don't range bet everything out of position when you've got an overall range disadvantage, and just like throwing in some like random flops. Ace Queen, maybe you can like justify it, but you still range disadvantage. On 2-3-9, just you end up just losing. You end up just losing like 10% of the bet that you put in. If they call everything, right? If they fold, then you lose even more. Right, if they have a folding range, or if they raise you. In reality, like how to exploit someone who just like range bets everything out of position, which a lot of weaker players might do, right? They like open from an early position spot and then button flats, and then they just range bet everything, especially in like live games and stuff. Like when you're doing that, one, you've got an overall range disadvantage on all the possible boards. So you're just making a mistake for the sake of making a mistake. And then your bet doesn't mean anything. So it's as if you just put it into the pot and then like checked. Does that kind of make sense? Right? Because the bet doesn't have any meaning anymore. Right? You did it with 100% of your range. So it doesn't give you any information about the strength of your hand. Right? It doesn't give away any information about the strength of your hand. But because we know that range versus range, there's a disadvantage. You might as well just chuck it into the pot and then check. right? Just, you know, juice the pot and then check, because that's essentially what's happening with these range bets from out of position. So just don't do it. And if you see someone else doing it, you just exploit them by just racing like crazy. Do you guys want me to run a sim as an example of that? I mean, we've got King 8-4 here. I'm not sure what this guy's going to do.
A very common formation. The cutoff opens about 28% of hands, and then the button flats him with actually a very GTO
Cutoff,
8 cents.
flat.
What rules can we develop for c-betting?
Okay, so he's... Yeah, the range bet just is just a nation to the pot. Okay, so we've got some weird sizes here, whatever.
8 minus 3166 is a 42-cent loss in a $65 pot. So the simplification that I'm currently using and that I'm going to recommend to you today is going to get you in the ballpark of 90.
No, you lose 42 cents. So you're losing 42 big blinds per 100 hands. What the fuck? The fuck? This reminds me of a meme. Hang on, let me see if I can find it for you. I mean, it's totally unrelated, but I find it funny anyway. This is the right one. I don't know why this reminded me of this, but it reminds me of this.
Emotional damage. You want something?
4.2. All right. 4.2 big blinds, 100 hands. Still a lot. Emotional damage. Oh man. All right. Now this is next. We're doing Jonathan Little next. We're going to pick on Jonathan Little next, but we need to finish off Alvin first.
.35%, a very complicated strategy that you probably couldn't play anyways. So before I go on to the simplification, if you've been a fan of this channel and this work, if it's been helping you learn, please like, subscribe, and share this. It really helps me out. I really appreciate it. Sacrificing much EV, but rather cards I can estimate hands like pocket.
So what is he doing?
Quarter is
Betting obvious triple barrels.
only going to want to start firing
75% of the time. Okay, so it's no locking, something. No locking.
So
Okay. Did we even get the original sim? We didn't even get the original sim. This is the no lock sim. Like, why? What was the point? What was the point of doing a simplification if you're just gonna like play this close to the original sim anyway? Like, why don't you just like look at the original sim and see what it does? And like, you end up spending more time doing these no locks than you would if you just, you know, studied from the original sim. And because so much of the game is played on the turn the river anyway, like you just end up wasting time. It's just a waste of time to lose EV because I don't know. I don't know.
Button, and
Come
it's
up
the
with
king of spades,
heuristic,
8 of diamonds.
heuristic.
You don't want to get called in position, even on a board that is generally favorable for the pre-flop caller, because the impact of the rake is so significant. So here, this is what an optimal strategy looks like, and as you can generally see, it does prefer betting non-heart hands over hearts, and pocket fours bets more often than pocket kings. So now let's test our strategy from before. We're going to change this to fixed.
Okay, so took you, eons of running GTO sims and then like taking some heuristics out of it just to run the heuristics through the solver and then showing that it loses a bit of EV. And then your argument is that playing the inferior strategy is okay because it only loses 4.2. I mean, 4.2 is a lot. It's not as big as 42. The reason why I made the mistake of 42 is because the pot is 10 rather than 1. I'm too used to the big blind being 1. Because just normalizing the big blind to 1 makes a lot of sense for... Because then you can just multiply it by whatever the big blind is.
Is again disgusting.
Like, a lot of this stuff ends up being just, within the realm of his exploitability. Like, if you set your exploitability to 0.4% of the pot, and then you run a sim, and then you see that the two sims have a sim versus sim EV of within 0.4, like statistically, you can't say anything about it because you would have got that result randomly anyway. I don't know. Like a good chunk of the time, you can run the same sim again, and then you end up with more EV because your exploitability is too high.
Is extremely small. Here, you're going to lose about 6 or 7 cents, depending on what this ends up solving down to. And so, as you can see, this 3 heuristic strategy is 10%. When you strategy would then try to replicate this study on a couple different dry board textures.
I mean, what was the point? Instead of just learning from the GTO sim and then looking at how the hands might play on the turn the river, or like building a better sim to see that the 60% size and 66% size is probably not the best fucking size to use on the flop in the beginning. Jesus Christ. And these raise sizes too. Like, what is... Okay. Next. Thank you. Next. All right. Should we move on, or I don't really understand what we got out of this. Went from looking at something that we didn't even get the original sim before he plugged in the simplified strategy. We didn't even get to see that. That's a bit of a shame. Maybe this was it. No. All right, let's move on. Okay. Following along. Who we have next? We have Jonathan Little from 2019, end of 2019. So again, a little more recent here. This is 2 years old, 2 years old plus 1 month. This appears to be one of the videos out of a course, because it says part 27 out of 40. All right, let's just have a look.
Single raise pots. So single raise pots, we're gonna have.
I don't know how much he sold this course for. Does anyone know how much this course sold for? Please comment in the chat.
have the largest stack to pot ratios, roughly 16 to 1. And when you have really high stack to pot ratios, a hand's value comes from its ability to make the nuts, right? A single pair type hand really struggles to get to showdown in large pots. So I listed some flop lines that are pretty common and what that does to the turn stack to pot ratio. So as you can see, if it goes like check, bet 1/3 call, you end up with a 10 to 1 turn SPR.
Okay, alright, SPR, alright, cool.
Another quote I really like. Acevedo says, the best use for GTO solvers is to analyze the recommended strategies and try to understand why the solver is choosing to play hands the way it does, incorporating the underlying GTO principles to our decision-making process.
Alright, cool.
Ranges look like this button range is a condensed range, weighted heavily, sevens through jacks, good suited cards, because the button's going to be for betting a polarized strategy.
This is good so
and
far.
And then the low jack.
We have a. Maybe the course is worth what we paid for it. Someone in the chat, please figure out what we paid for this course. So we have PowerPoints. We have a good leak. I'm liking this. We have a quote from some other guy. Good. Okay, and now what do we have? Aggregate reports. Okay.
So before we get into the concepts that we can see from this data, let's just kind of run through what we're looking at. So I ran the low jack, raise first in range versus the button range across these flops. And then here we can see the low jack's equity EV, equity realization factor, and then the button flat, equity EV, equity realization factor.
Oh my fucking god. Okay. No offense to Jonas Little, but this applies to like everyone. If you're gonna make a course, and like I don't know how long this course is. It says out of 40, so half an hour times 40. Let's say it's 20 hours long, and let's say 100 people buy your course, right? So 100 people buy your course, and assume that they all like actually go through the entire course. Fuck is wrong with my keyboard? Oh, it's a pen underneath it. So 20 times 100 is 2,000. So you've got 2,000 essentially watched hours of your course, right? And even if you sold the course for like $5 to those 100 people, that's $500, right? Maybe that $500 is worth spending on a better mic to not torture your customers for 2,000 hours with this crap fucking audio. Like, Jesus Christ. My God. Like, do you not realize that like people are actually going to watch this and then just like end up with a brain aneurysm afterwards because they've listened to the shitty audio for a total fucking like time period of 2,000 hours? Like, even if the content is amazing, like just the shitty audio is just torture. Like, why would you do that to your customer? I like what I saw so far, but like the audio is worth spending the couple $100 getting a high quality mic on. Like, I'm liking what I see so far. Let's
and then over here we're looking
continue.
at flop betting frequencies. So how often is the low jack using the 2/3 pot bet size? How often is the low jack using the 1/3 pot bet size? And how often the low jack is checking? And then similarly for the button, here are the betting frequencies across the same flop subset after the low jack checks. So how often is the button using the 2/3 pot bet size, 1/3 pot bet size, and checking? So let's first look at when the low jack opens and has a large range advantage. As you can see here, out of position equity, these are boards where the low jack has a large range advantage. A lot of times this is going to be two big card type boards, King 10x, Ace Jack X, King 9x, Jack 10x. And when we have a large range advantage from the low jack, we're betting very frequently, and we're going to be using that small sizing. Obviously we have an outlier here, which we'll talk about later on King 3-3. And then similarly, another outlier here This is a monotone board, ace queen 7. We're going to be checking a lot, and we'll go through a monotone board in the quiz section to figure out why that is an outlier. And on these same boards where these type hands,
Right, this video goes for like 30 minutes. So I don't want to have to go through all of it.
Lower, we're just going to check our entire range.
Look, what he's saying is not too bad so far. So he's put a lot of effort into this. I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt from 2 years ago. Maybe his sims aren't, amazing. That's why we see some, only. I mean, he's got a sim with the 2 bet sizes in it, and then check line, and assume at the turn the river is good. Like, he hasn't shown the sim, so I'm hoping at the turn the river is okay. I'm not sure what the raise sizes are either. Like, this is the problem with GTO with Pi solvers. Like, the aggregate reports just aren't as easy to get to. Flop breakdown. C players, C bet too often.
And high boards and lower, we're just going to check our entire range. So let's look at what the button strategy is. So this is showing the button flop strategy after a low jack check. We see a high frequency of the small bet size used, and when we're playing in the button in this situation, we want to simplify the strategy and only use this 1/3 bet size. I would say against probably 99% of your opponents, you can actually probably just bet range small here, because people are misplaying the spot from the low jack, and they're going to be over c-betting 8-5-3, which is going to leave their checking range to be too weak. But at equilibrium, we should be betting about 70% here, checking 30. The hands that really want to check are some ace high type hands, ace jack, ace queen. Exactly what you see here. After low jack strategy, after a check, button bets 1/3, and this is the pile solver response to that strategy. We're going to be raising 25%. Okay. Most people aren't finding a call. So 40% here.
Yep. Okay.
You have 6, 7.
Maybe you can try and explain why it's overfolding. It's a third pot bet. Button strategy. On the turn, we got 4 different sizes. That's nice.
Our top pairs. It's pretty bizarre, right? We think that, like, in most situations, without doing the study, I would almost always bet ace queen for value here. I can't think of not ever, like, I can't imagine not betting ace queen for value here. But clearly, the game theory software wants us to check our top pair, and then.
So it says the software says it, so that's why he's not doing it. But maybe like if you have a question like that, you could at least answer that question for the people who have bought your course. I mean, I'm just being nitpicky. It's like this for this 2 years ago is probably not bad. You got 27 out of 40, like it's probably not bad, right? If they give you the sims that we use to run this, like if they put it in a Google document and then like let you download the sims to go through yourself, maybe this is acceptable. I don't know what you charge for it. Maybe like, I don't know, if you've got 40 videos, maybe you charge like $40. I'm being nitpicky. Like, if you see something surprising out of a sim, the first thing that you want to do is like try and understand why it's doing that.
Really polarize our range using a massive bet size.
He just hasn't really explained
most of our 2-pair combos, all of our sets, and then back.
So bets twice pot. That's nice. A lot of the issue, and like just because of kind of like laziness and lack of the ability to do this, because like you have to really drill down when you're doing stuff, but because there's only one overbet size and it's being used all the time, like maybe you want to explore that a bit more.
Bet size.
To find the optimal.
So let's go through the turn call line. So say you overbet 2x and then the low jack player calls.
That calls.
So that allows us to bet more hands for value. Here we have to think about what pot odds we're giving to the low jack on his call. As you can see, if the low jack wins 37% of the time, it's going to be profitable for him. So very clearly we have to give up with some bluffs in our range. So let's look at how Pile Solver structures the button jamming range, as it's attacking our opponent's sets and 2 pairs. So one question we need to ask is, why are we not structuring out to beat our value hands? We need to be a little bit more value heavy in this.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. I like what I've seen so far. The sims appear to be okay. I mean, obviously not as good as the Zenith sims, but if they give you this, they give you all the sims and they've shown you an example, my critique for the audio is valid. Like if you're selling a 40 video course that goes for 20 hours, you can't have audio this bad because like people are going to listen to this and just going to wreck their ears, right? This is supposed to be paid content. That is true. So overall, I like what I've seen so far. And this was number 27 out of 40. It's a shame that's only one example of a turn in the river. And rather than looking at kind of the one size, I'm going to look at any other lines to kind of compare it. But it's broken down, I think, to a level that's a bit lower than it's aimed at a level that's a bit lower than what I aim my stuff to. Like I aim my stuff to like pretty high up. So I mean, if you want to pay to have, you know, shit dumbed down for you, that's fine. Like people do it all the time. All right. I think we'll move on unless you guys have any comments about that last one. I think there's just some small nitpicky stuff, but overall, I like what I saw. Any questions before we move on to split suit? I like how we put a quiz for this, for this video. Any questions, comments? Everyone just like, I'm eating nachos, so like, let me know what you ate for lunch, or if you ate nachos for dinner. Should we read the comments on this video first before we watch it? Okay. Beard critique. I mean, to be fair to split suit, I think his beard is pretty on point. Maybe it needs a bit more more like beard oil, but I like it. I like it. We're looking at the comments. Never admit. Focus on zoom 99% of the time. Ranges are atypical. Okay. Solver analysis is pretty questionable. Solver analysis is it's a case of shit in, shit out. I mean, Herbert, this is YouTube. You can just swear like no one cares. Against them calls 40% fold. I would have folded and go play some slot machines. So we can get some fold pre in the chat. All right, let's go back and see what we're doing here.
So
Alright,
here's
I'm
the
starting
actual
off.
hand. Again, hero is my student. So we are playing 1-3. There's a $6 under the gun straddle, and hero decides to call. We're not really going to talk about...
One thing I love about Split Suit is that, this is Poker Bank, whatever, is that his videos go all the way back to I'm sure his videos go back to like before YouTube was even a thing. And he's still teaching 1-3, which I mean, 8 years. He's got real grind, you know. Except now we're, you know, moving on to actually looking at the solver.
Preflop very much. I will say that I don't particularly care for Hero's overall preflop line. You'll see why in a moment. But I think the takeaways from this kind of analysis are definitely applicable to things like 3-bet pots, right? So say Hero had raised here to, I don't know, 18, and then I 3-bet. We can still find ourselves in a similar situation where Hero is playing as the passive player and has position and has a hand that I think is a hand that some people would show up with. But in the exact line taking, I don't particularly care for what happened, but you'll see what happened. So Hero decides to, again, just call after the straddle. There's another limp, and I decide to raise 255 out of the big blind.
But why are you playing against your student? I don't... Like, go play at a different table. Fucking talk about the hands afterwards. What are you trying to do?
Whether or not you like the sizing, that's okay, but...
I mean, 55... How big is 55? Is that like 18 big blinds? You squeeze to 18. Squeezing to 18 is squeezing to 18. Look, over this many players, this is not a bad squeeze size. Like, the size is like ripping it, like I like to do sometimes. Like I remember this with this one live game that I played. I think because my friends wanted to go to the casino. Where like it was like a 4x open, and then like 4 callers, and I'm just in the big blind with like ace queen something. It might have been ace queen suited. I just fucking rip it. Like they're like, "What are you doing? We're not playing 5-10. We're not playing 10-20. This is a 5-10 game. This is a 2-5 game. You shouldn't be raising that big." This is why you don't play 2-5 kiddies. You just you know, go and eat food until the 5-10 game or 10-20 opens up, and you just avoid the 5-10 altogether. In Australia, 5-10 plays a lot like 1-3. Sorry, what we're talking about 1-3. Let me get the numbers right. In Australia, you've got 2-5. Was it 3-5? Can't remember. You got one of the two, and the $5 one where the big blind is $5. It plays a lot like sort of these 1-3, 1-2 games from overseas. Just because in Australia, the currency is worth a little bit less, and in general, Australians are a bit more splashy. There isn't any game that you'll find that's actually, especially post-COVID, there isn't any game that you'll find that's actually lower than a $5 big blind. Okay. A lot of players love to play the $5 big blind because, you know, it's only $5. And then you have like these geriatrics come in. These geriatrics coming through with you know, $200, and they chuck it down, and then they somehow manage to lose all $200 by limp calling for an hour. And they wonder where all their money went. The trick was, I mean, you need to have good hands in order to win the pot. Just limp calling and then folding for 2 hours straight just means that you just lose. Okay. So
This is obviously
Squeeze.
sizing that looks a little bit more indicative of like a normal 3-bet pot in a 1-3 game than necessarily like a traditional 2-bet, but it is what it is. So hero calls again.
Oh wait, was this limped?
Situation where hero is analysis are definitely applicable
Was this
to
was
things
this
like
a?
undergun straddle.
Oh, it's
and
undergun straddle. I thought he min raised. That's way different. What the fuck is going on? I'm so confused now. Okay, whatever. I thought it was min raise and then like 4 callers. Like, oh, okay. I just put STR here so you see straddle. All right. Squeeze call.
will find themselves in a situation that gets post flop that this isn't like so far.
I'll put in the
gone
chat,
that it's
boys.
Like, you have position plus you have a decent.
Okay, so this is the quiz. There's a quiz based on this video or something. All right, so we've got the GTO Plus out. That's good. That's good. It's a good start.
And I'll show you the ranges real quick because I think it is important to see how they're set up, because whenever you're talking about solver work, if you don't understand what ranges are being put in the first place and if there's any node locking anywhere along the way, then understanding the output is going to be like extremely challenging. So I think it's better to at least understand what things are being put into the solver. I'll make this just a little bit bigger. So you see in this situation, I applied range 1 as my range and then range 2 as my student's range. Range 1, I gave myself kind of like the typical strong stuff, right? 9s.
What the fuck am I looking at? Can someone explain this to me? Hang on. Let's hope he explains it.
King Queen, Ace 10 suited, and then a couple of like nonsense combos, which I think is pretty reasonable for the way that I play preflop. We'll talk a little bit about this as we go through. And then range 2 is my student.
I mean, it's fair enough that he admits that he plays preflop poorly. Why is there these hands in here? Where did jacks and 10s go? Like, I'm sure if you just did like this is risk clear all. Like, I'm sure if you just did, you know, like an eye here, and like a nose, and a smiley face. Like, maybe this is more accurate. I don't know. Maybe like you can even color it in to make it look like the Joker. The Joker's got like red. And like it's got like a green nose or something, right? Whee! I don't understand.
Range, and I assigned this a couple
where does this
ways.
come from?
I threw 6s through 9s fully in there because I think that a lot of people would kind of take this approach. And again, I'm not saying that I love this preflop. I'm just saying that I'm not shocked if someone does this with 6s, 7s, 8s, or 9s. It's just kind of like a common thing. People are pretty uncomfortable in straddle pots, and I think they kind of tend to do this more often than they probably should.
Okay,
and
where
then
did the other
also
where
in
did the
here,
other hands go? Like you just, it's like he hasn't thought about every hand, and so it's just like, oh, I'm not going to think about it, so I'm not going to put it in at any frequency at all. It's going to be 0.
I put things like Ace King. I put things like Ace Queen because again, I think a lot of people will consider going for kind of a slower approach. Again, atypical
at
spot with the
100%
straddle
frequency.
and being next to act, but I'm not shocked when I see someone play like Ace King or Ace Queen in kind of a slower way. And then facing the bigger raise preflop, right? Like a more normal raise here would be after a couple of limpers for this raise to be maybe something like high 30s, low 40s. Seeing it at 55 is a little bit weight, and I have queens at a 10% weight. The reasoning being that I think with like jacks and 10s, I think those are typically going to be like raises right off the bat, right? I think this is probably a raise with something like 9s or 10s. I'm sorry, with tens or jacks, but I think with something like queens, some percentage of the time it goes kind of slow play, and then same thing with aces and kings. And again, after that
But
really
if it's
large
slow
sizing,
played, then why don't
I
you
think
raise?
a lot of people would kind of change their plan and go a little bit more passive
Why?
rather than like limp
Just-
re-raise when they have aces or kings. And again, all of those are fairly downgraded. It's more just
Why is ace king suited in there all the time and ace king offsuit in there all the time? I don't understand. I'm so confused. Like, even if you just forget imposition, like, what the fuck is going on with that imposition? Oh my god. Just having an existential crisis right here. Anyway. Okay, I mean, I think he just has to make like a huge assumption about how how people are playing in order to like want to raise nines into that. Like, you made the assumption that they like limp queens through aces and ace king. Queens through aces like a lot of the time, and then ace king 100% of the time relative to sevens, and they call that. I don't understand where the logic came from for this preflop stuff. And then, okay. All right, where does he show us where the tree is? Where's the tree? Okay, this is a tree.
So essentially, player one is me. So in this situation, again, they think I should bet $45, which was the c-bet size that got used. Well,
he just So I bet this c-bet size of 45, and I just magically know that it's the optimal size and no other size is going to be used, so I'm just going to ignore them when I put it into my solver. Oh my god.
the bet size ended up getting used again in the quiz. Sorry, I have like so many different tabs open right now. It's difficult keeping track of things. So 45 was the number used, and in here it says that I should be betting 69% of the time and checking the other 31. Now, interesting, after I check, it's interesting when we start following this kind of tree all the way through and start seeing what should get bet in this situation. So let's just kind of start there, because do I want to start there? No, let's start with the bet, only because that's the first question. So I'm not really going to focus too much on what the solver says that I should be betting with in this situation. We're going to focus more on what Hero should be doing with sevens and with that range as a whole. So I think that if we go over here where we bet,
Okay.
Let's see what the solver says Hero should be doing with sevens. So if we just hover over it real quick, we see green for all of it, and green is call. So
There's the weird bet size.
okay, there's a
and
decent
then-
amount of value.
How big was the bet size? What the fuck is going on in this sim? It's 45. $45 and a 120 and a 130. All right, let's see the turn. Is there a turn? Like, okay, he goes and just talks about the flop for 40 minutes. Oh no, there is there's a check bet line. Check bet raise line. Okay. that Split Suit's making a troll video or am I making a troll video? Because I'm so confused. Because I was trying to troll, but Split Suit's been trolling me for the last fucking half an hour. I have no idea what's going on. Jesus Christ. Okay, we have flop bet sizes.
When we're looking at spots like this, let me see. Can I pop this down just a pinch? There you go. That way you can see the numbers down below. So, you know, there's a good chunk of people that are like really just right here in this rock, somewhere between $43 and $83. But that's a pretty big spread when you think about it compared to size of the pot.
This is a multiple choice question. We've got the answers for check, bet, jam. I don't know where he went to check. I'm being trolled here. I don't understand where this came from. Why is the sim so messed up? Jesus Christ. What the fuck is going on? Where is the bet line? How do you get to the stage? Okay, where is it? It's back here somewhere. I'm so confused about this. Where it was like bet call and then like you've got to bet like 1/3 pot at a position and the folding frequency is 12%, which I guess is sort of reasonable. But then what happens on the turn? Why do we keep jumping between the bet line and okay. And why is there only one bet size? Oh, and then this goes for 30 minutes. What's the next question? Okay.
Because I think most people, if we go back to the flop, after a check here, I think most people are inclined to bet this a very, very large chunk of the time. And if check. I think, but by the same token, like I think a lot of this just boils back to the flop check, and situation like this, and have to make some decisions through all of it and get really wonky really quickly. Percent of the time, which is really, really high. If we did check, all of a sudden the betting percentages are much, much different for our opponent. Changing ranges, you know.
Check ace. Oops.
Good morning. How are we doing today?
Okay, let's move on. I don't know what's going on there. Okay, that was very confusing. I don't know what I can say besides the fact that none of that made sense to me. Like it wasn't even trying to make sense to me, so I'm not gonna try and explain what's going on there. Besides just fold pre. Some of these videos wouldn't exist if they just folded pre. I mean, none of these videos would exist if you just folded pre. All right, let's move on. I think we've got another one. This one's called the perfect GTO range when facing 3-bets pre-flop, and we got Chris Iwa. Apparently, okay.
Button 3-bets you. Everyone else.
I understand what's going on.
You're deciding what.
I understand what's going on with this graphic. But why is it one like a 2-dimensional image that's been tilted, and then why is it like moving?
So let's start by talking about the two major.
I don't understand that. You're just trying to confuse people. Okay.
ranges that we have over at Red Chip Poker, the core range and the pro range in this exact situation. Why don't you start by walking us through the core range and kind of what we're looking at here and what we're
when they start. It's just there's too many weird situations where they're going to be out of position, sort of a middle strength hand, and it's just it doesn't feel like it works for most people when they're really starting out. You know, that is kind of the optimal range on there on the right with pro, but with the core ranges, like this is a very stable, protected set of ranges, and if you do this, you'll be fine. It's not a huge deal.
So there's an 8%. So this is the hijack facing the button 3-bet. 8%. This is the GTO range. Where did the pocket pairs go? Where did the suited connectors go? Why do you call this pro? I think I'm having an existential crisis again. Like, I don't. So we're looking at the 4-betting range, and they're just going to talk about these two ranges for. I'm not listening to 20 minutes of them talking about one specific preflop spot for simplification of GTO ranges. I mean, why don't you just like give them this and then just say you can simplify it however you want because you'll probably be okay. Discretionary hands. Stop folding so much. Look, I mean,
and I guess one
I
other
don't
thing.
know why this one is titled Stop Folding so much, because I'm pretty sure like a lot of the problems that beginners have is the exact opposite of them folding too much. All right. Maybe we should fold more. Maybe you should like see that, you know, folding all this shit. I like how like Jack 10 suited in the GTO spot is like indifferent, and like 8s and 9s like indifferent between folding and continuing. And then like you have other suited connectors which actually play better against the 3-bet range, believe it or not. They're just not in there. They're just always folded. I mean, in both these two, like the exploit that the button can do is just like 3-bet a lot and then check back a lot on the flop. Look, after being trolled for the last half an hour by split suit, I'm not getting trolled anymore. Should we move on, or do you want me to talk about this more? This is only last year, by the way. Moving on. All right. This is getting to like very recent stuff. I don't know why people sent me this, but they wanted me to review it anyway. This one is by Carrot, featuring Clanty. I don't know who either of those people are. Let's see.
Game starting here, so let's set up the heads up. King 5, I will be defending here. And folding turn, we will bet range, and on turn we will just press call. I think there is some raising going on with some 5s, but I don't think it's King 5. I think we'd want to use other hands here, so it's just call. Folding is out of the question. Turn is 2/3 check, I will check the turn. Okay, this is a very clear bluff for 2/3. Oh, interesting spot with 8-10 here. So this is easy bluff. I will defend here infrequently. I roll to defend. I do think we are defending sometimes, basically. He calls with Ace 9, yeah, very, very fine, cool. I think he can even do some jamming as well if he wants to. So I think, yeah, turn is probably indifferent, and I think we have to defend at a low frequency. I rolled a 4, which is aggressive for me, and not passive. And on the river, I imagine we just have to fold and call with some better blockers. It's not a range bet in heads up, but this hand bets really often. It does function as a value bet, and obviously has backdoor straights, backdoor flushes, overcard to the king, so it does pretty well. Turn will be checking. Ace 8, so we do block some wheel aces here. And we have some better jacks. It's unlikely.
Plain explain. I don't really.
So fold.
Looking at a specific spot.
So, I rolled a fold basically. Like growing, and you haven't got much invested into the pot, so it's more expensive. So just note that. On turn we go with
the thing is with plain explains is compared to like the Jonathan Little course thing, they're just like very easy to make. You just like rattle off your thoughts and. Well, blind, and people like watch them, but like no one gets any. Like you don't actually learn that much from watching a plain explain. I don't think.
So I think I do have to play a lot of raises here. We are checking the turn. I think my side.
It's different from like if you like recorded a video of the hands that you played, and then like you go through that video and you talk about each individual spot in depth, because that requires about twice the amount of time or 3 times the amount of time that it would take just to make the plain explain in the first place. Because right now, like all that he's doing is just explaining his actions with like, it's like, okay, I'm gonna check, I'm gonna bet, I'm gonna call. I rolled high, so I'm gonna call, and it doesn't really explain anything else.
Sizing would be half pot here if I was to bet, but I'm not going to bet this hand ever. I think we're kind of forced. We can't sit here with Queen Jack and only call. I don't believe. Versus a 1/3 lead when we're sandwiched behind. I believe we'd have to raise this hand sometimes and flop. That's what I've done. But now when we get 2 calls, we're just kind of. We're done. I don't think we put any more money in unless the river is a deuce of hearts and he bets 1/3. Unless the deuce of hearts. Ah, that would have been a good clip. Alright, well now I think we have to... Oh, so bet, raise, call, check, check. I think the only play here is to bet 1/3. I think this is the right play. Do I think I'm balanced here? No. I think I don't have many bluffs. Feels really hard to find bluffs here. I would...
How is it hard to find bluffs? Didn't you just like check the turn? Okay.
Showdown, I expect to win against Ace 7 of diamonds. 6s, wow, I'm surprised he had that hand. I think that's definitely a mistake from him. He definitely should value bet the river there. I think like he can have slow plays, but 6s is not going to be a slow play there. Well, quote unquote slow play. Like what I mean is, you have a hand that's strong enough to bet, but you choose not to bet it due to unblocking bluffs or blocking the calls. 6s is not doing that. So I think 6s would not be a hand you want to slow play. But if you had...
Okay. Plain explains aren't so interesting to me. Because there's not a lot... In plain explains, there's not a lot of actual content in them. It's just mostly filler. That's why I don't do very many myself. Because like, just why? I don't really see. Like in terms of like content, just putting out content, blah blah blah. But it's kind of like, you know how people play Fortnite or whatever, and then just fucking stream that shit. It's the same shit except for poker players. And this is just it chopped together. So like if you're streaming yourself playing and you're talking about it, it's a plan explain, but it's the equivalent of. Equivalent of like, I don't know, a grandmaster just streaming their chess. Like they're not really going to explain what they're doing as they're doing it, so you're not really going to learn anything from it. So in terms of what the content that they're putting out, it's entertaining, yeah. Maybe you can learn something, but you're not going to learn a lot. Definitely, and you're not going to... Sorry, is my face covering his face? No. Okay. His face is still in frame. Cool. Any questions about that? I mean, I don't do a lot of plain explains for good reason, because it's the same as just streaming. And like, if I wanted to stream, I'd rather stream something else. just going to keep eating my nachos in the meantime while you guys make up your mind about whether I should keep watching this. We're moving on. Cool. Moving on. Sorry, carrot guy. Don't really care too much about your 1K now. All right. Who's this guy? Black Rain 79. I love how it's got the word official in his what appears to be Instagram. He's got that many impersonators. Yes, it has to be the official one. Okay. My God. All right.
Today I want to talk about the flops that you absolutely have to stop raising because it is so obvious to any decent player that you're bluffing. And don't worry, I'm going to walk you through some examples in today's video step by step so you know exactly what flops to avoid raising. So let's jump right into it. First flop that you need to stop raising is paired flops. Now, why is this such
What? Oh my God. Sorry, I didn't watch this one beforehand because I knew it was. So I knew it would be good. Stop raising paired flops. All right, let's.
a big problem? Because it is an obvious bluffing situation. It's a spot where it is very unlikely that anyone has anything. Let's jump into an example right away. You call a raise pre-flop in position with ace jack of spades. When I say in position, by the way, I'm talking about a situation where perhaps somebody raised it under the gun or early position and you called on the button. So when I say in position, that means you're going to be the one acting last on the flop, turn, and river. A massive statistically proven advantage in poker. We always want to be using position whenever we can. So decent spot, we got a good hand, let's go to the flop. The flop comes with a paired flop, which is 8 of hearts, 8 of clubs, and 5 of spades. So if your opponent bets into you here, you know, a lot of people will try to get tricky here and they'll go for a raise. But the problem that they don't realize is that any decent experienced poker player is just going to call you down here because you're not representing anything on this board. Guys, the board is 8-8-5. What are you really saying that you have when you raise here? You're basically saying, I have an 8. But we know that there's only 2 other 8s remaining in the deck. We know that an 8 represents a very small portion of your range. You're probably not going to be raising a 5 here. You shouldn't even have too many 5s in your range. And your opponent also knows that you're probably not going to be raising a hand like pocket 9s or pocket 7s or pocket 6s.
Okay, I tell you what you should do against that opponent. Just fucking raise pocket 9s. Like, I don't know. It's just like, what are you talking about? Like, you should just not raise because, like, you can just make the 8s not. You just look at the 8s and just say that they're not irrelevant for either player. I mean, maybe in position you're not like betting here doesn't make too much sense anyway, but like it depends. I don't know. Oof. Let's see if I've got this somewhere. Probably don't because I need to resync. No, I don't have it because my thing's rethinking.
Those hands are just going to call. And of course, your opponent also knows that if you have...
Why would they just call? Like this doesn't make any sense. The logic is very disjointed. Like your opponent bets if you raise here, you'll get called a lot. Okay. Isn't that an argument for making a raise? Like it goes back to like why you make a bet or a raise in the first place. Don't understand why you're doing that. Then you shouldn't be doing it. You think you're just going to get called a lot. The main problem here is if you get 3-bet, then that's a problem. A lot of time it goes raise and check back. Okay, so the argument is you don't want to raise because you maybe just like bluffing the spot. Okay, let's move on.
At a hand like aces, kings, or queens, you would have re-raised them pre-flops. Thing.
Okay.
Past several years specifically versus a grunt to specifically and get ourselves in one of these sort of bed and take it away later on. The final thing that I always mention in these videos is to understand your true equity on a board. We do have a backdoor flush draw, the backdoor nut flush draw actually in this situation, and we have 2 strong overcards, so we have a ton.
His voice sounds like a my face is in front of his head, in front of his face. I don't want to do that. I don't want to show him too much disrespect. My face needs to be somewhere else. I'm gonna put it here maybe.
Of equity that is percentage chance to win versus a hand like pocket 10s or pocket 9s, and we don't want to be blown off our hand right now by getting re-raised and having to fold. So now let's talk about what do you do.
You got to agree with me, right? He does sound like a lot like a sports commentator.
On the turn, when you just float on the flop, you just call in position. Well, it's actually really, really simple, guys. It's winner for me in recent years.
They check, you bet. They bet. You fold. I don't know, man. This is...
And you put yourself in a bad situation when
people are gonna just like... I like how there's only got one example though, even though he said that there was going to be more than one example. Is there anything more substantial to this? Like I can't believe he made a 9-minute video on how to point the flop with on 8x5. What are you supposed to get from this? What is anyone supposed to learn? This reminds me, and this is like yesterday, 2 days ago. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe some people just don't understand how to float the flop and what it means, and just like you've made a big deal out of, and then you've made like a big fucking. It's just you make a big deal out of nothing, and then the first statement that you say is stop raising paired flops, and people are going to take that to heart, especially like depends like who you're targeting this to. If you're targeting this to like people who are very beginners, they're not going to know what that means, and then they're going to apply it to the wrong spot. So like maybe in this specific spot that applies, but the rule in general is just false. Anyway. Should we move on, or do we want to keep listening to the sports commentator? Downloads. I don't know where I got this one from.
Hey guys, this is George, and I'm finally here now with my video on mastering the button versus the big blind. So sorry it's taken me so long to put it together, but I think this should be good and useful to anyone who sees it, basically. So to start...
Now, this one, like the Jonathan Little one, is from some course somewhere. So, and the title of it is Mastering Button versus Big Blind. We've got an hour to master button versus Big Blind. All right, let's do it.
So effectively, our expected value across these 95 flops should be a quite good indication of what our expected value would be across every single flop. I have the results of a mixed strategy, so the kind of results where we're allowed to bet tiny, big, and talk about what which for us to consider.
So
and finally have the result
comparing 33, 23, 63 and range check. And mixed strategy for... I don't know how old this video is. Someone needs to tell me. I don't even know where this came from. But apparently it's not that good. It's by You Mad Bro. Maybe I will be. Okay, so we're trying to achieve...
how we can see that, but how we can play against these guys, especially seeing as we'll see from the results.
We're trying to simplify our own strategy while simultaneously exploiting people who simplify their strategy. Why don't you just do neither and just play close to GTO as you in the first place? Oh my god. Alright.
Okay, so what we have here is the kind of master database sheet. So you see that I have all these separate tabs with the different kind of results from the different...
Hopefully they in the creation of this course they gave you the actual flop simulation so you can look at it yourself. You Mad Bro is a very good high stake stars rating. All right.
Scripts. So the optimal strategy, the 23% strategy, 33% check range, and then some additional ones here.
Check raise.
But these are all kind of just like data sets that are there for me to import them when I need them.
Okay,
finally, the EV of the range betting 66%. And you can see here they're color coded, where a loss of over 2% of the pot is red, between 1 and 2% is orange, and green is less than 1%. So basically, in my opinion, I kind of think that especially at 100 and 200 zoom, like simplifying your strategy is good, and you should be willing to sacrifice 2% of the pot to do so.
Why are you simplifying? Oh my god. Okay. So the pot is 6. So the pot is 6 or whatever, 6.5, but I don't fucking care. The pot is 6, which means out of a possible 6 big blinds over 100 hands, you can win 600 big blinds per 100 hands. And if you're sacrificing 2% of that, you lose 12 big blinds per 100 hands. So whatever this is that you're doing is stepping out of your own way to lose like 12 big blinds per 100 hands.
So okay. I'm going to be going for all the ones which are orange, but if you want to be a bit nittier, you can just only simplify on the ones which are green. But then you have...
Or just like not really simplify at all, and then just try to play the mixed strategy, try to learn about what that means. And because a lot of the time with these, you know, simplified strategies with like the tiny range bet, blah, 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 it requires, in order to fully get your EV, it requires your opponent to make the mistake of like raising too much, just the same way in that earlier video we looked at, like out of position here to check raise like 27% of the time against the 1/3 bet. Like that's how you end up getting your EV with a lot of your hands. You could just do the alternative, which is, you know, have some different sizes, target some different pot sizes, understand how strong the strength of your hand is, and then try to grow the pot according to how big of a pot you want to grow it to. Okay. This is an average. So the EV is an average. So starting off, the EV itself is an average of all the EVs of the hands, and the EVs of the hands is an average of the wins losses of the tree, right? So when you're looking at the EV of a range, that's an average of an average. And if you know anything about averages, taking the average of an average by itself like usually ends up being close to meaningless to begin with. So each of the numbers in this cell, in these cells, are like kind of meaningless to begin with. And then we go and take the average of the average of the average and then compare them. I'm like, what the fuck are we talking about? It doesn't make any sense. Oh my god.
Whereas less people using the range bet 23% strategy. And then we can see here that range checking, if you range checked on every single flop, you'd be making quite a big mistake. And if you range bet 2/3 of the pot on every single flop, you'd be basically setting money on fire. So that brings me on to the first thing we'll note is that range betting 66% is actually never the best strategy. There's not a single flop out of these 95 where you're better to range bet 66%. There's some flops which is acceptable on, but only 5 of them, and all of those flops have a better option in another strategy option. So yeah, we can kind of throw that one out the window, but it was interesting to put it in, and we'll put it
like a big part of why like the EV of doing this or this is, you know, somewhat close. Is because like you're in position 1 and you have an equity advantage, a range versus range equity advantage. And so when you're taking the average of the EVs, it appears that if you can that you can get close, but you're taking the average of an average. And then when you look at these numbers, you end up with an average of an average of an average, which still loses you, 0.4 out of 30. Right, like 0.4 divided by 32. Still loses you 1.25% of the pot. Right, which out of us 6 big blind starting pot loses you 7.5 big blinds per 100 hands. By just simplifying to one or the other against a player that is actively trying to exploit people who range bet by raising a lot, which, I mean, with the way the meta is going, I mean, people would just start running counter sims to the range bet flop stuff and then start playing that, and they'll be able to win way more EV back. Like it's like the big one defense, like exploitatively, you shouldn't even be looking at the GTO stuff. You should be looking at how to exploit people who range bet in this spot. For whatever tiny size. And the reason why this 23 is losing less than the 33 or the 66 is because it's committing less to the pot. So maybe that's the reason why your forced range bet isn't losing as much. Because they're not putting as much in when you fuck. Alright. You could just put nothing in by checking back the shitty hands, which is where the extra EV comes from with your mix strategy. Anyway. Okay, so what's going on here? What's going on here?
How we should play versus someone who checks back at their range on those flops. So we're going to start by looking at this 7-6-3 two-tone. We see that we have a check range on the ace-5-4 two-tone, and also that what I've noticed is that 23% is a reasonable strategy there. And this is what we'll see as a trend across these ASSX boards, that checking your range when it becomes kind of ace, low card isn't terrible, whereas betting 23% is also generally a reasonable option. So now we've kind of talked about what kind of category of flops we want to be checking back our range on. We're going to look at...
Okay, so he's making an argument for, on certain flops, checking back your entire range. I mean, this goes against like everything. Well, it doesn't even make. So like you just get rid of an entire street's worth of positional advantage by forcing yourself to check everything. When you got a strong hand, you keep the pot small, so you lose value. So confused. Look, check when you're in position. You should almost there is no spot. There is no spot where in position ever checks back their entire range. Like it just doesn't exist. Because if they do that, then the opposition player, when they've got a strong hand, will just bet more often. Right. I mean, the only spot that actually exists where just like the opposition's got the nuts. But if that's the case, then they would just bet. Like their entire range is just the nuts, and then they just bet 100%, and so their checking range is undefined. Like there is no spot in the entire game, right? Multi-way, heads up, blah blah blah, where you can like justify in position checking back their entire range. It's just not. It's just like antithetical to the entire premise of like range advantage and like positional advantage and whatever. It's kind of disappointing, to be honest. The way to exploit people who should check back their entire range is just start donking a lot. I'm sure on these sims there aren't any donks, so like I know on some of these 7-7, 6-6 kind of boards, like the big blind should be donking a lot. I don't know if these sims were run with donks. Probably weren't, which is why the EV looks okay to check back the entire range like this. But if they run with donks and the players you're playing against, like know how to donk the boards that are good for them, which there's not that many, so like you can just like you just start donking your entire range and just weaken the checking range, but just having garbage in there. And then like you look at the sim here. Do we have the sim?
What kind of category of flop? See, when we're checking our range, we don't need to worry about how they play against us on the flop because they don't have anything to do. So we check back everything.
Okay, so they don't have anything to do with it. So I mean, that's a mistake. So you force them to check everything. If you're checking your entire range, the opposition player will just start donking a lot. Right? So it's like you just haven't thought about what happens when you let your opponent actually do things. And like on 7-6-3, this is not a board where like it's out of the ordinary for the big blind to donk. So why are you not running your sim with donks? Like the reason why the big blind donks these kinds of boards is because the in position player is going to check back a lot otherwise. Right? So when it goes check, in this is just super artificial. Okay, and it goes and explains it for 10 minutes. King 7-7 goes and explains that for 10 minutes. So there's like 20 minutes of explanation about how you can like do the mental gymnastics to justify checking back your entire range on the boards that aren't good for you. Exploitatively, yeah, okay, well then maybe that makes sense. Because if you're exploiting someone that doesn't donk on boards that are good for them, then yeah, you want to check back at a high frequency. But like just as a simplification, it doesn't even make that much sense. Because what happens if your opponent donks into you? Then do you have to simplify your response versus donk line? Like what I would really like to see is a lot of players, like these people who try these simplifications, just like apply it to a spot where out of position has a lot of bet sizes they could use, and then you have to simplify your counter strategy to that. say for example, like small blind versus big blind, where you're on the big blind, you're just going to have difficulty justifying a simplification for one or the other because it's so easy for the big blind, so easy for the small blind, sorry, to adjust to that and counter your simplification.
The 23% strategy is used on very already.
23.
So then when we get cool,
the reason why the solver doesn't lose as much EV against itself when it bets a 23 is one, because it's put less money in, so all those shit hands lose less with the forced range bet, and then two is going to the turn. I don't know if there's donks on the turn. Maybe there's not in these particular sims, but going into the turn, it can then check back the turn or overbet or whatever. So like it uses both the turn and the river to try to make up for the fact that it made a mistake on the flop to get the EV closer to what it was originally without the mistake of range betting everything.
We have to think about how people say when we bet everything on one street, the next.
Yeah, so these frequencies are telling me that there's no donking line. So if these are the frequencies for in position, then there's no donking line for out of position on the turns. Because notice how small they are, like how small the betting frequency is. Like if you know anything about the 50% rule, I mean all these should be a little bit closer to 50%.
Street we cannot bet already.
Is there any turns?
Never a really high stronger equity is an overbet size advantage. The backdoors particularly, you get the jack sevens with the backdoors.
Bet call.
All these ones have backdoor straight draws and backdoor flush draws. But I'm not going to talk too much about check raise ranges because we've kind of gone over it quite a lot already. So then when we get cooled, we have to think about how often we're going to be barreling. And we've talked about this pattern a lot. When we bet our range on the...
Yeah, okay. Bet call, and I was forced to check everything, right? There was no betting line for the out of position player. So the donking line was removed. Anyway. I mean, turn donks are pretty common. Like, they happen all the time. Shouldn't have to explain that. Like, even if we go back to this one, like, after it goes bet call, and there's a fair amount of turn donks there. 9.42. Raise everything. In this exploitative one, where like we force it to raise a reasonable range, like it ends up donking like 3% of the time, but certain turn cards are just going to be really good, so it's going to donk a lot. And then like the reason why it's not donking at a high frequency is because like the donk size that we gave it is very big. We gave it 60%, so that's why the donking frequency is so small. So like if you end up just with running a bunch of sims, like you should actually have a very small donk size. Or more than one donk size, as I do in most of my sims for this particular spot. Because then otherwise you end up just seeing that you check back the turn a lot after you bet the flop.
Flop?
I mean, this is big blind versus...
Raise a lot of his nuts. Better where sets of the nuts as well. Are much better for us. And so we're up next 5-4 two-tone. So this is going to be another board which isn't so good for us as the in-position player. 53% equity again. So I wouldn't kind of bet. I wouldn't lean on that.
Do people raise this frequently? Like in reality, do people raise this frequently? Because like that's how you get your EV when you've got a strong hand. Like a lot of the time. Anyway. My question is why? Like, why was an hour, a 50-minute video spent on coming to the conclusion that you can, range bet, a quarter pot on every flop and lose 2%? What was the real point of that? Did you learn anything other than if you bet 23% on every flop, you can lose 2% of the pot? Probably not. I mean, the time would have been much better spent just looking at different flops and seeing how which hands kind of bet and which hands kind of check. A lot of the time when you have a shit hand, you should be checking back the flop, right? And sort of giving up. Sometimes they improve. So we're done with this, we're done with this. This last one I think is another... This one is with this guy. Stefan. Put it here. Any questions about the last video? Before we move on to Stefan. Should we just move on? I think we're moving on. I don't know why I was sent this one.
200 pool is not that loaded so far, so I added a 100 table where I guess someone of the community wrote me that we might meet there today if I'm playing that limit. So let's hope to find that buddy. That ace 10 suited, sometimes 4 bets, mainly flat. I'm going to 4 bet this time. I mean, I can play without bluff 4 bets probably in those positions, but I don't want to. Just saying that on NL200, people usually know my name. They lack the 4 bet bluffs there, the 3 bet bluffs from the big blinds. So against a value heavy range, it doesn't make sense to have bluffs at all because they are just not showing profit. But yeah, it's a lot of assumptions. And got it through, and adding this one as the next one. Next 4 bet here.
4 bet call.
Okay, that board, we can play a 2 street game, just going for half pot and then jamming turn on most cards. Or we can just c-bet small. I like the bigger bet a little more with the 10 connectivity, because what is he sitting on? Like either having pockets. Against those, it doesn't make a big difference. But those, like something like ace queen of clubs, are potential floats, and they just hate facing that bigger bet. So I slightly prefer that. I guess the solvers are with me there. And now he might have 4-5, he might have 5-6, he might have ace queen of diamonds, and then there's only one option left. We can like sneak in some checks here, but I think this is the standard jam.
Yeah, I don't know if that's standard. Not because like the EV isn't very close. It's just, well, I mean the EV isn't probably not very close. Like when you've got a hand with which is this strong. Like you want to get the bets across multiple streets, because then you can increase your EV that way. And this particular hand doesn't have a lot of haste to it, and this board isn't like super wet for a 4-bet pot, so I don't really see the point of jamming when you could get more value by splitting your stack across the 2 streets. Because what was the jam, like 1.5 times a pot? Or something? No. Pot size jam. That's a pot size jam. This is what I get for not keeping track of the pot size. Pot size jam. Maybe the flop bet was a tiny bit big, but you do see a lot of those bigger flop bets in 4-bet pots on these kind of boards. So half pot's probably not alright, not too bad. Then the question is, okay, they've got 60 at a pot of 80, so it's 3/4 pot. Can you justify splitting this hand into 2 different bets? That stack size. And the answer is probably. I mean, I don't hate jamming either, because the stack pot ratio is a bit lower. Usually when you've got a hand this strong, you want to split it across the 3 streets. So yeah. Maybe you can go for like half pot or something like that, or like 1/4 pot. Because what does 1/4 pot leave here? That puts 20 in and at least 40 left behind. Which is to put a 20% jam on the river. Or 25% jam on the river. So maybe you can go 1/4 pot. It's the decision between the two is probably pretty thin. And it's difficult to come up with that on the fly. The other thing is that the 7. I mean, you've got a lot of haste hands here in terms of like queens and jacks potentially that will want to jam. Putting kings in here doesn't seem too bad either. Aces probably does go for the check at a much higher frequency. So there's a lot of different ways you can play it. Maybe it's just a stylistic decision, but I would have probably gone 1/4 pot and then jam river.
The solvers
rather than
are
jam
with
turn.
me there, and now he might have 4/5, he might have 5/6, he might have ace.
I don't really understand the argument for that stuff.
Not a very small size, but a somewhat small size.
Whatever,
Folding is allowed in those spots, but he's sized like used a very not a very small size, but a somewhat small size. And now those pocket tens, I'm not sure about that guy. He's not too aggressive. It's like, good to be somewhat sticky. I think this is the best card in the deck for me, and that definitely check this one back, allow him to hit a straight or a top pair while playing this here. I went for a c-bet cutoff versus big blind. Now this is a nice overbet spot that king 5 with the diamonds can obviously just use a smaller size as well. Let's just have a look at both. And yeah, we get the fold there. And then those pocket tens here are just invulnerable. So even if like villain is, I don't know, checking with a flush draw or whatever, I don't care. So I prefer betting my jack X on that turn and just slow play my super nuts. Now it's the clearest jam of all times. And yeah. So that pocket jacks up here is very interesting. That 15 BB rejam, we're definitely calling that. I think, and we will only call that. The question is how to play versus that guy out of position there. Seeing the snap fold is great. Who mainly sit on medium pockets. Whenever they hit 2 or more sets, so they have 8s and 7s high frequency, I go check only because they just have more nuts relatively than I have, and then I'm just going here in check call mode. Check raising some definitely makes sense as well, but that nut flush draw dominating some of his potential bluffs like random queen 10 of diamonds.
Yeah, this is the issue with like Plain Explains. There's not a lot of actual content going on there, and the spots like jump around a lot, so it's hard to figure out. It's hard to follow unless you're paying a lot of attention. Most people just like watch these, don't really watch these. They just kind of have it in the background, don't
quite a lot. So people, when they have pocket kings, I'm just saying, they see that and they are scared, and then they scroll up, etc. So when they don't do that, he might have king 10, he might have 10-9, he might have ace 10, he might have ace king, and then I'm just winning with my king queen. Up here, facing that 3-bet, I definitely call my ace queen suited. Against that very, very small bet, I can start building a raising range. I will randomize that now, and we randomize just to call to keep my range protected. See in position what happens next. For example, that 10, having plenty of king 10, king queen, king jack, ace king off the flat just on the cutoff. So it will be easy for me to react here. I have plenty of king x. I will start betting the 2 pairs not too often. I will bet most king x, and I will start betting some of the sets that I'm having because they still have, I mean, more nut equity than my ace queen. I have 4 outs, checking back, and then probably.
It depends how big you want to bet. Like oftentimes like you get really weird spots in 3-bet pots where like you 4 to a straight here, and like you can actually bet some hands like this just to get the other guy to fold worse hands. Because if you check back, your check back range ends up being too weak in terms of like not having as much king x. So like if you put a little bit of like weird 2 pairs in there, and it's like most of the time these hands are indifferent. Put a weird 2 pairs in there, even though like I don't really call with too many worse hands than like 2 pair. And like a lot of time they got a straight, they're just calling with a straight. A good chunk of the time they're just gonna fold, right? So you're betting to get them to fold. So like it's not returning to 2 pair into a bluff. It's just like the alternative is checking back. The other guy bets into you. They might bet bigger, whatever. So it's kind of like a weird block betting position, getting worse to fold, and then you force showdown by betting very small. And it really applies when like the ranges are kind of polar in the sense that both players have the nuts or some bluff catchers and some weak hands. The checking back's not too bad either.
And that board is pretty brickish, so I use a little bigger bet to attack his random overcards, clean my king here. 7 of spades. I mean, having a spade is a little plus on that board, but it's like, I mean, not really having anything. And now it's probably a very, very clear check back and call most river spots if he's not really going crazy. We could talk about a bet here, but I don't really see it. Yeah. That is a very good card for me. Seeing a not big bet would be great. Check. Should be fine. That's lots of time bank being used. And we have the call of pocket 9s. Okay, so he missed a clear value bet on the river, and I'm very sure that he was not thinking about raising on that river. So yeah. That was very, very weird by him.
I mean, this is what 100 NL.
He's missing all the value in the world from.
I mean, 100 NL people miss these river value bets all the time, so I don't really. The when they're missing a lot of these river value bets, because like it's a 3-bet pot, people are scared of shit in 3-bet pots, especially lower down. So yeah, they miss those value bets, and so hands like these aren't value bets themselves. But it just means that the ranges are being too condensed together. The checking range ends up being like weak hands and kind of like middling hands. So like they're not constructing the opposition checking range correctly. Sure, like 9s there could value bet. Maybe it could just like pot it or like pot it or whatever. But like no one does that, and so when they go to jack, they're just bet a size that's too small with a jack. And then they leave the checking range totally capped, right? But capped with a lot of like bluff catches, which, you know, people are just want to check call with, right? Rather than going for thin value themselves. And they go like hearts or whatever. So they end up just misconstructing their betting range and like not even having a small betting range out of position and constructing their checking range to be, you know, very capped. And so the way to exploit those is when you've got a very strong hand, just bet enormous, or when you've got a bluff, just bet enormous. And then when you have like these middling hands, which you would normally go for value for thin value with, you just check them all back. That's an exploit to exploit the guys. I mean, a lot of weaker players than 3 o'clocks just miss those value bets. I'm saying what this guy did was wrong. I'm just saying that there's different ways to exploit players that will make bets like this. And like the EV of the sevens when you bet 3/4 pot is probably going to be pretty close either way. Like the reason why it's a value bet is because you expect to get called by worse half the time, right? Compared to when they continue, right? So sometimes they're going to raise and sometimes they're just going to call with better.
My ace highs. I mean, he has 4, 5, 5, 6, all the hearts. Me too. We're here. Wrong HUD. That's not the HUD I'm usually. Let's just do it anyways. And that is board where we can mainly use the big sizing.
Yeah, a lot of hands, a lot of haste here.
Interesting.
Maybe snap that off.
King. Well, here 3x
queens and
from
jack X,
84
very
big blind stack
very
or
strong
something
haste
like
hands.
that. Definitely defending my suited ace, and I actually take this one to check raise here. Interesting.
Jump around.
But if he has a more linear range, which means
we go back to
talking true.
We go back to talking about the ace king. Okay, I'm done with that. Any questions? Questions or comments about anything that we've talked about so far? Put myself back here. Go for 3 hours now. I mean, we talked about a lot of different videos. Some of them were a lot newer. It's a shame because I asked for like the cringy shit you guys could throw at me, but all that cringy shit was from ages ago. Hopefully by now they've gotten better. All right. Well, interesting stuff. What was the good stuff? I mean, there's a couple of planned explains from recently that I was thrown. They're okay, but planned explains don't really teach you that much because the spots just jump around and they're kind of like very unstructured, unorganized, disorganized. And when you're trying to learn, like you want the content to be very structured. The Jonathan Little one from 2019, that was pretty good. That was the end of 2019. So I imagine for its time, it was very up there in terms of the level of the content. Would have preferred some more examples, but maybe had that in other videos. It seems appear to be okay in terms of like how many bet sizes they're using. I mean, this is for, you know, the hardware that you have back 2 years ago, which is about half of what the hardware you got now. So like maybe the sims could be improved a little bit, but you know, for that time, running a sim on a 128 gigabyte machine was pretty expensive, and especially if you want to run all of them. The audio definitely could have been improved in that one. Like if you're trying to sell a course, like don't torture your customers' ears for how many hours the course is. This other thing from you, Mad Bro, I don't understand what that was trying to do. That like simplification thing was very, very similar to the Alvin stuff that I looked at earlier. Like it just doesn't work, and it just admits that you're losing 2% of the pot and forces you to just study more on the turns and rivers. You end up putting yourself into more difficult spots than turns and rivers because of your shitty flop bet. And like we looked at the EV of the hands, and just like the reason why it can keep up is because for your stronger hands, your opponent's going to check raise you a lot, but that ends up losing EV compared to all the weak hands, which you end up hemorrhaging by making the bet in the first by making those bets, right? Because like all those weak hands would much prefer to check back and give up, or check back and try to make a pair, right? And that's where all the EV is coming from with a lot of these complicated simulations, right? The reason why this is not just obviously a range bet, range check spot is because your range isn't justified. Like the strength of your range isn't overwhelming, and so like betting your entire range doesn't actually make sense. Like only on a few boards, your range versus range equity is going to be pretty overwhelming, and so range betting makes more sense because your opponent like has to overfold. But in spots where like your opponent doesn't have to overfold, a lot of these checkbacks will be preferred by the bottom of your range. Because like even just like unpaired undercards, they still have 6 outs against ace high to make a pair, and so like even though the EV is like a few percent, couple percent of the pot, that's not something that you actually want to give up, right? Like here, for example, like this 5-4, 6-5, they got an EV of 10 if you've got the forced range bet. Going back to the Alvin example that we ran. But if you don't have that forced range bet, the EV is 14. So you win 0.4 big blinds by not doing that simplification and having some checkbacks or whatever. So 0.4 big blinds is no 0.4. Yeah, 0.4 big blinds because 10 is one big blind. It's $4 here. Yeah, so 0.4 big blinds is 40 big blinds, 100 hands. So you end up like when you've got like these very weak hands making like enormous mistakes by doing the range bet thing, and then you're trying to justify that by saying that your strong hands have a high EV because you get raised a lot. Maybe they don't raise that much. Maybe they just raise the same amount, and the EV of the strong hands actually isn't that high, and the EV of the weak hands ends up improving because you didn't get raised. You still lose a fair amount with your weak hands because they're forced to put money in when they don't want to. So going back to this 14.5 versus 13.5 with the 5-4. So it loses $1. Right, which is 10 big blinds for 100 hands. Oh yeah, Split Suit fucking trying to troll me by making videos that don't make sense in 2020, 2021. Like, what the fuck was that? Jesus Christ. Like I was hoping to troll him today, but turns out Split Suit trolled me instead. Amazing. So let me go over those sims again, because I realized that I had my face showing. So this is like the GTO one with the two sizes. And we get an EV of 14.29. If you just do the range bet where like you think your opponent's going to raise you 27% of the time, 10.06, so you lose 40 big blinds by 100 hands with that particular holding. By doing that, assuming that your opponent responds correctly, well, whatever. And even if you don't, even if you just assume that they're doing the same thing with the node locked range bet, the 5-4 is, 13.54 big blinds, which means you're losing 10 big blinds by 100 hands by range betting there, and it's because like you forced a weak hand to put money into the pot more often than it liked to. Any questions, comments? Cool. Interesting to see how poker has progressed from 5 years ago with that Turley video to closer now with like Goose Call. Except for Split Suit, who's just trolling everyone for the last 8 years. And what's the other guy? Black Rain. I don't really understand what the point of that last video was. Like a turn. You don't raise a flop because you... What was the argument again? You don't raise a flop because you don't have anything. Like you called in position, so like... Anyway, that was so ridiculous I didn't run a sim on it. Let's do that now actually. Let's actually do that just to make sure. That what we're talking about is like somewhat legit. I don't know, like low jack maybe. Low jack maybe. I mean, this is not the target audience for it. I mean, for like Rain's videos, it's not the target audience. Like people with a solver, like have a solver, generally don't. Is that 8-5? Generally don't care. 5.5, 98, no rake, whatever. Whatever, 75%. Like even if you just do some weird shit like this, I'm pretty sure there's gonna be raises. Could be wrong. The whole idea about not raising the flop is dubious. Like it's just as bad as like the whole idea of checking back everything. And the people that the target audience that you've got is just not going to really understand that. Floating the jack, backdoor flush draw. But that's with a 75% pop bet. And like if you do something else, right, where like someone who's stronger might do like 25 and 50 and 75. And then like maybe you want to have some raises that are pretty small. On the flop. See what happens. when the bet sizes get pretty small, you kind of have to raise in order to stop them from using the small bet as a block. But the whole argument, like if you face a big bet, and he wasn't even talking about bet size, just like, oh, you face a bet, you don't raise. Like even in that sim, we faced a 3/4 pot bet and we raised 5% of the time. Even though our raise size was ridiculous, with 75% pot raise. Alright, this is boring, let's stop that. Big bet size, small raise frequency. When you're in position on a paired ball, maybe you can justify it, but like it's just not something that you want to be teaching. In my opinion, to like beginners, like the whole idea that you don't raise, like well, maybe you can think about like how the raise makes sense. This is min raise. Maybe you can min raise and you get 3-bet a lot, right? Like that's the reason. If I just like make them not 3-bet, then yeah, like we'll probably raise a lot. And like exploitatively, we can do that if you want. Where like you can just like force them to call, like they're like super passive with some of this shit. Where they just call instead of 3-betting you. People like to like trap quads and shit, don't they? Sorry, for anyone who didn't understand what I just did, I'm doing a node lock where this flop raise isn't being 3-bet as much. So before it was being 3-bet like 25% of the time for the min raise. And now I made it like 15. And this is with a turn and river like tree, which is kind of shit. So it's not really gonna prove too much. There you go. That's the raising frequency now. That's the raising frequency. When you don't get 3-bet enough. Maybe I need to force more calls or something. I'm not sure. Any questions? I have to open up my second bottle of pot. We did the dew at the beginning and now we're doing Sunkissed. Have you guys tried the Sunkissed without like the sugar-free version? It tastes really weird. Like it's a really weird aftertaste. It's worse than the difference between Coke and Coke Zero. Coke no sugar, whatever you call it. Your part of the world. I think they're owned by the same company as well. Maybe it's owned by Pepsi. It's the same bottle as Pepsi, so wouldn't surprise me. Any questions? Cool. We'll leave it there, guys. I think we had a lot of fun today. There's some good shit that we looked at. some bad shit that I looked at. Some terrible shit that didn't even make sense. Jesus fucking Christ. We learnt the reason why you can get close EV, range versus range EV, when you do weird range bet shit. We also learnt why range betting out of position is really bad, especially when you got an equity disadvantage. I don't know who said it, but there's one. Apparently, there's someone that just like range bets everything in 3-bet pots when out of position. I'm just like, what are you doing? It just ends up losing. Even if they just call the entire range, like, because the range on a lot of flops ends up being pretty bad. Do I have any large plans for Zenith in 2022? Not really. I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing. All right, thanks, guys. See ya.